Chapter 131. I'm on a boat. The lichen man turned to look at Udona. Ah, apologies, Captain. Didn't realize he was one of yours. He said respectfully, before handing me back my quest scroll. No harm, no foul, boy. Just get on with business. She said with a toothy grin, beckoning me over. As for you, Tiber. Ye heard right, ye'll be part of me own crew aboard the Jolly Dodger. Her grin became more mischievous after she told me the name, and I had to resist a powerful urge to slap my face with my palm. Don't be like that, now. 'Tis a fine ship, leader of the uncharted voyage. As she spoke proudly, she pointed to one of 12 ships parked at the docks. Most of the ships were just 1 or 2 decked, but the one she pointed at looked like it might have 3. On the top of the ship, there were 3 large masts with the sails rolled up, a basket positioned at the top of the central mast. I was honestly surprised that their sailing technology had advanced this far, considering that they were still largely in the Bronze Age, having yet to fully transition to iron. Then again, they likely used magic to reinforce the ship in several key areas, and there was not a single cannon on any of the ships. That made sense, though. Against the monsters we'd be facing in the open ocean, a high-level combatant would be worth more than a dozen cannons, even if they did know how to produce them. I nodded my head slightly as I looked at the ship. Shall I go ahead and board, then? I asked, looking to my captain. She nodded her head with a smirk, causing me to sigh as I walked out towards the port. I didn't both taking a detour, and just walked straight across the water, it hardening into ice beneath my feet to carry me along before thawing behind me. Once I got to the Jolly Dodger, I was able to see a figurehead carved in the shape of a praying woman, her hands folded in front of her. Going by the ears, it looked to be a felon woman, rather than the kitsune I had been expecting. Shaking my head, I caused the ice beneath my feet to raise me up so that I could land on the deck. Now aboard the ship, I saw several groups of people bringing large barrels and crates onto the ship, taking them down below. Everyone knew that this would be a long journey, and there was always the chance that we wouldn't be able to easily return to resupply, so it was understandable that they were stocking up on as many supplies as the ships could hold. Whether it was wood or nails to repair the ship, food to feed the crew, or spare weapons to fight off monsters, we had to be prepared. Seeing as nobody was asking for my help, I moved off to the side, finding somewhere near the front of the ship to sit down and close my eyes. Or at least, that was the plan. So, I take it you found her, huh? Kelly's voice spoke up from next to me soon, causing me to look up at her. She really wanted to play the pirate, huh? I couldn't help but groan now that I was talking to Kelly. Though, it seemed like she was busy, with one arm holding up a large crate, and the other carrying a barrel. You better get back to it before anyone catches you slacking off, though. She chuckled slightly, shaking her head before turning around and taking the containers below deck. Udona, got a quick question for you. You free to talk? I closed my eyes, focusing on sending a prayer to the goddess of life. In a bit, Dale. Let me just round up the rest of the crew we're bringing with us, and then we can talk face to face. Easier to keep my focus if I do it like that. I nodded my head at that suggestion, keeping my eyes closed and waiting. It had to have been at least an hour or two later when I finally heard footsteps approaching me again. Let's talk in me quarters, Tiber. Udona told me, before turning with a grin and walking to a doorway just behind the wheel on the raised deck in the back of the ship. Inside, I saw a table, chair, a few shelves with books, and a small cot in the corner. On the far wall behind the chair was a small window, letting me see out into the city behind us. So, what did ye need to ask about, Tiber? Udona asked, moving towards the table and leaning back against it, smiling at me as she crossed her arms beneath her bust. Questions about the ship, the crew, or me? Yes, no, and yes again. I answered, shaking my head and closing the door behind me. Soundproof. I can't be having the captain's business overheard. Only way for sound to go out is if the door or windows opened. Do you really have to keep that accent up, then? I raised an eyebrow slightly as I asked that. Ye can't be blammin' me for that, lad. She shook her head helplessly and shrugged. The big girl upstairs insisted. Big girl? You mean Tara? When I asked that, she shook her head again. However, soon her eyes began to glow ever so slightly, and she smiled a bit more. No, she meant me, Tiber. I don't stay connected to this incarnation too deeply, it's a trick that Tara taught me. I let her live out the life I set up for her on her own, and guide her here and there when it seems interesting. Oh, well, that changes some things. So, the captain wasn't really Udona, in a sense. But she was, at the same time. Well, either way, I was wondering if you could tell me some of the details of this ship. Since my goal is to protect it, I need to know what it can do. Of course. Udona smiled happily, nodding her head. It's really great, honestly. The best ship that the Beastkin have come up with. The hull is made from the wood of the ironbark trees found in the deep woods, which can only be harvested with a key-infused blade. Their defenses were then further strengthened by an enchantment, meaning it'd take a creature of at least level 200 or an equivalent force in order to break through. The sails were made to work with the help of a druid supporting them. So although there are only 3, they are large and capable of catching a much greater amount of wind to let us keep up with the smaller ships. The only real drawback is that we don't have the technology to create any offensive systems for the ships. But that's where our crew comes in. I nodded my head in understanding at that. It's a bit early for cannons, magic or otherwise. Anything else I need to know about? Well, there's one thing. Udona smiled, opening a drawer on her desk. She pulled out a large, red sphere. The other 11 ships all make up one large warding circle, with us at the center. The ward can create a barrier around the fleet, but it won't last long against a sustained attack. It's a last resort tactic if we come up against a creature able to overpower our crew. And what about the crew? Your pirate level can't be 100 yet, but you're at the level cap. So you have to be a good fighter yourself. When I guessed that, Udona shook her head. Nope, actually I'm currently the highest level pirate, stuck at 85. But I'm not that much of a fighter. For my combat class, I decided to give the summoner class a shot. If we get into trouble, I'll summon one of my Ians. But they wouldn't be stronger than a pinnacle champion like Kelly. Note to self, summoners call their summons Ians. Good to know for the future. Alright. They told you about our detour, yeah. Yup. Udona smiled warmly as she answered. Orivy begged me to take you to see her dungeon, and even made me memorize which island it was on so that I could help you find it. A soft chuckle emerged from my mouth, followed by a smile forming. I'm sure. Anything else I should know before we set off? Where I'll be staying? Any jobs expected of me? The druids are all being placed at the front of the ship, where they can keep an eye on the horizon and guide the wind and waves. Your main job will be to keep the sea and sky calm during the journey. The monsters aren't our biggest threat, not really. Here, the storms are dozens of times more terrible than the world you came from. The whole reason why druids are mandatory on all ships is precisely because of that. Even the best ship will get overturned if it hits a storm. Also, one other thing. Udona looked up, as if she had almost forgotten. You'll need to set a portal gate at the harbor. We'll be stopping near any island we see along the way and creating more gates, so hopefully we'll be able to have an easy way back to the mainland. Just so long as none of the gates are too far apart to connect to the network. After she said that, the glow faded from her eyes, and she shivered slightly. Yek, always feels weird when she takes over like that. No matter. Anything else ye be needin', Tiber. The captain looked at me with a helpless smile. Well, a name would be nice. Something to call you other than Captain. I smiled back to her, having the feeling that life was quite complicated for incarnations that weren't as deeply connected like this one. Ye can call me Captain Boat. I'm on a boat. And before ye go laughin', it wasn't my idea. Or hers. Didn't even know what the blasted name meant in your old tongue, till the big girl upstairs filled me in. Seems she chose me family, 'cause of our name, and near laughed her tits off when they named me. Apparently, that's why she wanted me to be a pirate in the first place. Poetic irony, she called it. I have to admit, I tried really hard not to laugh. I really did. But, a pirate captain named him on a boat. Oi, you go on to her post, lad. She pointed to the door as she heard me laughing, the helpless look on her face only making it more priceless. I waited until I was able to calm myself down before nodding to her, turning and walking out of the captain's cabin. As I moved to the front of the boat, I saw an elevated bench just beyond where I had decided to rest before. I guess that's my post. They probably don't expect a non-physical class like druids to be standing all day, and I probably have to sleep here, too. The last part of that thought came when I saw that the bench included a woven blanket draped over the seat. This is too soon to be payback for me laughing at her, right? But it makes sense. If my main job is to watch for storms, then I can't do that below deck. I still don't like it, though. A few minutes later, and I could hear Amana's voice echoing out around us. All right, ye lads and ladies. All who are coming aboard the Jolly Dodger, take posts. Everyone else, take a walk. We'll be raising the anchor in 10 minutes, and I don't want to hear word of any stowaways aboard my ship. When her voice faded, there was a flurry of movement. Those people carrying the last of the crates did their best to hurry up, moving them below deck and then jumping off onto the docks. By the time everyone was ready, I could see that there were only 20 people aboard this ship, including myself. Of them, all but 5 had reached the level limit, those last 5 looking like they had more auxiliary jobs like chef or doctor. Although they weren't at the level limit, they were still decently high level. Most likely, there were similar numbers on each of the other ships. Instead of a large crew, they focused on each member being as effective as possible. That way, it reduces the supplies consumed, and allows for a longer voyage without added dangers. Alright, mateys, it's time to set off. Kelly, pull up the anchor. Amana ordered from the wheel of the ship, and I looked back to see Kelly move off to the side, where a long, thick rope was draped over the edge. She groaned slightly as she grabbed the rope and pulled, causing the ship to rock ever so slightly at first. However, soon she pulled up a large rock which had been tied to the rope, setting it down on the hull. Fila, Kag and Saru, lower the sails. 3 more people began moving, all males. They went towards the rigging, loosening the ropes to let the sails drop before tying them off again. Tiber, give us a breeze. Guess it's my turn. I barely had to focus for a moment before the sails caught a gust of wind, slowly pulling the ship from the docks. Turning my head, I could see that the 11 other ships were also starting to move, entering into a circular formation around us. Let's sail the uncharted voyage to lands unknown. For the crown, for the sisters, and for treasures unknown. Amana happily called out as she stepped up to grab the wheel, keeping a firm grip on it to steer the ship. Chapter 132. The Cliff at the End of the Sea. As we sailed beyond the horizon, the ships continued to be carried by a favorable wind. Before us, the water smoothed out, as if paving the way. Between myself and the other druids, there was no chance for any natural disturbance. After sailing for roughly half an hour, the formation of the ships began to move. Of the 11 circling ships, 3 moved in to set up a triangle formation around the Jolly Dodger, while the other 8 spread out to fill in the gaps that they left behind. With this, we had 2 circles of ships around us, each with their own defenses and combatants. Immediately after the formation was established like this, one of the lower-level people in the group jumped up, grabbing onto the rope ladder on the central mast. They hurriedly climbed up to sit in the basket atop the mast, and began scanning the horizon with their eyes. No doubt the scout of the ship. I could feel traces of ki within the body of the scout, and the way his eyes glowed when he scanned the surroundings likely indicated he was a mage as well. Though, if he was recruited for this job, all of his abilities should focus towards the position of being a lookout. Captain Boat. The man called down from above, his voice carrying even against the wind I had created. What is it, Saru? Amana responded from behind the wheel, gripping it tightly with both hands to keep the ship steady. 3 monsters to the front. Appear to be a trio of Leofin. After hearing him say that, I glanced ahead, using ki to enhance my sight and pierce beneath the calm waters. Sure enough, there were indeed 3 large fish, each no smaller than the smaller ships in our fleet. Though the system named them king catfish, due to their bladder-like whiskers and sharp spines. Each had a level of just over 200, so I wasn't entirely worried. Amana closed her eyes for a long moment and spoke. Darl, ye got 3 Leofin just off the bow. Can ye handle them, or do ye need some assistance? Though I could hear her speaking, her voice wasn't carrying very well. It was likely that she was using some special technique to communicate, going by the fluctuations of mana. Righty then. Opening her eyes, Amana grinned up towards the lookout. Pay them no mind, boy. Darl can handle a group of would-be sharks like that. Even as she spoke, I could feel a strong fluctuation coming from the front ship. Focusing, I saw 2 of the crew members step forward. Given their nearly identical appearances, they seemed to be a pair of Kitsune sisters. Both with black hair and tails, and slender bodies covered in black robes. Each of the sisters extended a hand out towards one another, clasping their hands together. I could hear one of them speaking, while circles of light formed above the other. Lady of Ice, King of the Deep, Duke of Blades. It took me a moment to realize what they were doing, and seeing them pull it off left me amazed. The 3 princes stand firm to defend their home. Those who strike against them shall be torn asunder. As the one sister spoke, the glowing magic circles began lighting up with an icy blue hue. They're combining their powers to make higher-level elementalist spells. When the spell was finished, 3 giant spears of ice launched from the circles, hovering up into the air. As if they had eyes of their own, each one turned and stabbed towards a fish, piercing cleanly through their bodies and embedding into the seafloor below. The threat's clear, Captain. No other monsters in sight. Saru shouted back from up above as the dead fish stopped, floating slowly to the surface. Idona grinned happily as she heard that, closing her eyes again. Good work, Darl. Give the sisters my regards. Emil. You're on cleanup. Harvest what you can and join up with us. The core of a few Leofin would make a good spare battery for our ward. As she spoke, we kept sailing past the fish that were rising to the surface, not paying any more mind to them. Behind us, 3 ships broke off the formation, staying behind with the monsters. Though, they were only back there for a few minutes before I could see them starting to catch up again. All the while, I was piecing together in my head how those 2 sisters managed to do what they did. One has to be a high-level mage, and the other is probably the ship's druid. As sisters, their teamwork is probably really well practiced. They probably have plans in place for what kinds of spells they use for given situations. The mage sets up the spell and holds it in place, and the druid feeds the natural energy into it with the orders to modify the spell. In truth, that sounded easily, but was actually a lot more complicated. It could never be so simple to just replicate the effects of a higher tier class like that. Just from watching, I could tell that it required a great deal of trust and cooperation, as well as years of practice to pull something like that off. Soon, a low chuckle emerged from my mouth as I looked at the 11 ships surrounding ours, and then to Amana. If the Vanguard is that strong, I can only imagine what the rest of them will be like. But, that doesn't mean I'm weak, by any stretch. After getting that little jolt of reality, I closed my eyes and focused. The other druids would be steadying the waves around us, so my only job was to keep the wind blowing until a storm arrived. In other words, I had plenty of time to practice. Something that I knew about druids from a long time ago was that their class levels weren't everything. More important was their mental discipline. They did not have a limited amount of energy to work with like a mage or a monk, but their energy was weaker. At the same time, that meant that training would allow them to improve, even without their levels increasing. Since I would be spending the next year as a druid, I felt that I should make the most of this time and truly practice with what I had. So, I spent most of my time with my eyes closed, using my token to connect with the natural energies. I wanted to keep this discreet, so I did not make any obvious effects like the fireball I used to test it before. Instead, I created a single ball of ice beneath the ship, and pushed it downwards. This was perhaps the most literal mental exercise I could come up with, finding the limits of my control and trying to push against them. Even only after 2 hours at sea, the water was so deep that the ball of ice did not reach after being pushed to the edge of my control. Time and again, the ice struggled to float to the surface, and I firmly pushed it back down again. I could feel a headache building from the constant focus, but at the same time there was something else. It was hard to gauge since I couldn't see it, but it felt like the ice had started to go deeper over time. I kept up this training for the entire first day of the journey, until the sun had long since set beyond the horizon. No longer could we see land, no matter which way we looked. Just the boundless sea reflecting the clear sky. I don't know how many monster attacks the fleet faced on this first day, as I had been fully immersed in training myself, but at the very least nothing happened to disturb the centermost ship. No matter how distracted I was, I wouldn't have been able to ignore that. Oh goddess of fate, you have a collect call from your keeper. I wasn't really sure why I felt the need to, but I wanted to call Tara to talk for a bit. However, soon she replied in an almost monotone voice. I'm sorry, the number you have dialed is unavailable. Please hang up and pray again. Har har. Real funny. Maybe I should just tell Orivy that you were bullying me. As soon as I thought that, the voice spoke up in my mind again. Oh, hey Dale. Sorry, didn't hear you the first time. So, what's up? I chuckled softly as I heard that, shaking my head. I was wondering something, and I wanted to get a confirmation from you. Plus, I like to have someone else to talk to now and then, and Leowin is meditating. That wasn't a lie, as I had felt Leowin meditating inside of my soul as soon as the ship left the port. Alright, fine. I guess you wanna ask about those 2 sisters, then. The Elementalist twins. I felt a small grin tugging on my lips as I shook my head. No, I think I have them figured out. I wanted to ask about myself. Is it just me, or is my control over natural energy actually growing pretty fast? Because it seems pretty fast. There was a light laugh over our connection in response. Oh, it is. But that's not really anything special, given the situation. You're a level 11 druid who realistically should have the control and limits of a level 124 druid. A normal druid of that level would have trained for decades in this time period to reach their limit. Right now, you're simply adjusting. It's just going faster for you than normal because of that new achievement you got when making the world spirits. The extra affinity with natural energy will let you reach your new limits faster than normal. Well, that was certainly reassuring. I had all but forgotten about that little enhancement, since it didn't seem to do anything for me. Alright, thanks. By the way, what's up with Udona and Amana? I thought that incarnations were more deeply connected than that. For most, they are. She answered with a low sigh. But there are exceptions. For instance, someone like me with all of the knowledge of the system. Because there are effects that could potentially read the mind of another, that knowledge would be in danger of being leaked out if something happened. So my incarnations have their own personalities, though they are loyal towards me and I can experience the world through them. But they can't know any knowledge that is not already available within the world, so they can't fully connect with me like they do the others. I just taught Udona how to distance herself from her incarnations in the same way that the system forces me to. I nodded my head slightly in understanding. There was undoubtedly a way to get some mind reading or mind control powers. And an incarnation didn't have any sort of special divine protection. Unless the god or goddess personally interfered, so it made sense that the system would have a failsafe for something like that. Alright. Well, any idea how long it'll take me to reach my limit, then? After I asked that, Tara seemed to go quiet for a long moment. If you practice like you have been, I'd give it 2 months. Might seem like a long time, but really it's only that short because of your affinity, and the fact that you already have access to the levels in the first place. I was just about to send another response when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Looking back, I saw Amana standing there, a smile on her lips. She wasn't looking at me, but out ahead of the ship. Beyond the edge of the formation, something was creating ripples in the water. A giant, serpentine body poking up here and there. Looks like it's about time for a real fight, Tiber. She said in an excited tone. Can't have ya sittin' this one out. At the very least, need to keep the ship safe for us. As she said that, she walked forward, towards the front of the ship. I could feel the same mana ripples spreading out from her as when she spoke to the other ships before. Alright, boys and girls. Shall we show these landwalkers why they put us in charge? Chapter 133. Chumming the waters. Isn't it a bit too early to be running into giant monsters? I couldn't help but question, while I felt a powerful energy building up inside Amana. The monster ahead of us was a giant serpent, glistening blue scales lining its body. Its length was easily 100 meters, but I couldn't even see the head of it from where I was. All I could tell was what the system told me, that it was a level 290 sea prince. Ha! She let out a loud laugh, grinning broadly. Y'all think this is a big on? Boy, you really haven't been to the sea yet, have ye? No, this is just a normal monster this far from shore. As she explained that, she moved to stand at the front of the ship, the wind catching her coat and causing it to flap wildly around her. Glancing to the sides, I saw that each ship had their own captains taking position at the front of their ships as well. As if having rehearsed it, each one of them reached for the sword at their hips. Alright, mateys, Amana called out, and I could hear the sound of metal sliding against metal as she unsheathed her blade. Release the Kraken. As she shouted that line, she thrust her sword into the air above her, as did all 11 other captains. A symbol could be seen on the side of her copper sword, glowing as her mana flowed through it. The symbol appeared to be a small circle with a dozen lines extending from it. While I was focused on the symbol, it actually seemed to float up off of the blade, and hovered into the air. Ship defense'll be up to you, Tiber. We'll be needin' all our focus to keep this beastie under control. I could see as similar glowing symbols rose up from each of the 11 other ships, all moving to merge with the one that Amana had summoned. As each new symbol was added into the mix, it pulsed with an even greater power. Even with the druids all working to keep the waters calm, ripples began to form around us, circling out away from us. Before I could consider just how strong the thing they were summoning would be, the final symbol merged into it. In a sudden rush, it shot down beneath the water. Those of us new to sailing all glanced down off the side of the ship, though I had an easier time identifying what had happened. The ice that I had been practicing with was shattered as a pulse of energy swept over it, a giant form swelling into being beneath the waves. The water beneath us tried to rise up, forcing me to disperse it to the sides to prevent the ship from capsizing. Udona didn't really create a kraken, right? Right. The sea prince ahead of us seemed to sense something, its gargantuan head rising out of the water. Its snout was elongated, thick whiskers spreading a dozen meters in both directions. A pair of curved horns rested on its head, thick fangs lining its mouth to give it the look of an eastern dragon. Yet, the sensation I felt from the monster wasn't anger, or even hunger. It seemed cautious, almost afraid. Its eyes betrayed the intelligence that was hidden within, its species likely near sapience. All of a sudden, a dull roar rang out from underwater, and its eyes went wide. The sea prince turned to flee, but no sooner had it attempted to do so than a pair of giant tentacles lashed out from beneath the waves. Before it had even finished turning around, the tentacles had wrapped around its neck. Its body struggled, blood seeping out from where it had been grabbed. Waves shot up and splashed about as the sea prince struggled against the beast beneath the water. Even with the druids dispersing it to prevent any harm to the ships, the sight was a marvel to behold. Soon, another pair of tentacles lashed out, and then another. A total of 8 could be seen before the body of the sea prince had been dragged down beyond our sight. Yet, the water still shook from the struggle occurring. Only after a long moment did it die down, and we all knew that the creature had been killed. Still, the captains remained motionless, their focus not dying down for a second. I was about to ask what was going on, but surprisingly Akalia's voice echoed in my mind. Sea princes travel in schools. Don't let your guard down, Dale. Well, that explains why they were willing to summon up such a big fish to deal with something that seemed weak in comparison. While the kraken was great to show off, it was really overkill to just deal with one. But, how big are the schools? Anywhere from 10 to 50. This close to shore, you'll probably have to worry about a dozen at most. While a sea prince has a strong body and powerful scales, it isn't a true monster. It doesn't wield any type of energy, so it is seen as a weaker fish. Its only methods of attack are brute force and a poisonous breath. I nodded my head slightly, listening to the information. If this could only be considered a weaker fish, I had a hard time imagining what the strong ones would be like. Here they come. Amana's words broke me out of my thoughts, though when I looked I couldn't see anything. I had to enhance my sight with ki in order to see deep underwater. Like Akalia had said, there were another 10 of the serpentine creatures angrily speeding towards us. Or more precisely, towards the giant monster that now rested beneath us. The monster's tentacles were too many to count, swaying back and forth in a slow and natural manner. Its head was gigantic, easily bigger than the Jolly Dodger, with each limb stretching out hundreds of meters. Two particularly long ones, no doubt the ones that had first hooked the first sea prince, actually seemed to stretch out over 2 kilometers. It was likely that the first sea prince had wandered off from its school, which is how we found it alone. But when it was killed, the others all came to avenge it. They didn't even hesitate as they launched up towards the kraken from below, their mouths opening and spewing forth a green inky cloud. The kraken, however, did not seem to mind. It simply targeted the closest 2 of the sea princes, and its tentacles shot out. Before they had even finished closing their mouths from using their poison breaths, the 2 longest tentacles had actually speared straight into their open jaws. This caused the 2 sea princes to panic, biting down on the tentacles. Black blood flowed out, yet their struggle only lasted for a moment. Soon enough, it seemed that the tentacles had found something vital and crushed it, because the princes went limp. Now that another 2 from their school had died, the remaining 8 seemed to hesitate. They saw the black blood leaking out from the tentacles, and steeled their resolves, continuing their charge. However, my focus was again broken by Amana speaking. Spear lash. She said the 2 simple words, the mana fluctuations showing that she was likely speaking to the captains. When I looked down again, I saw the many different tentacles of the kraken seem to stiffen up, the tips thinning to become like spears. When they all thrust out at once, it almost made the kraken look like a giant porcupine. To the sea princes, however, it could only mean their deaths. There was one that managed to avoid a fatal injury, its hard scales deflecting a tentacle to the side. However, the others hadn't been so lucky, pierced through mouths or eyes, or in the gaps between their scales. Instantly, 7 more of the sea princes had died, and the 8th had turned to flee. End. Amana spoke again, and the body of the kraken began to ripple, pulsing with a blue light. Soon, it shattered into glowing shards which flew to the surface, each turning into the same symbol that I had seen before. One of the symbols went to each captain, who then sheathed their blade at their hips. Tiber, I'll be needing a strong wind from ye. Amana said hurriedly as she moved back to the wheel. Put the wind and wave at our back, and get us out of here. I could feel that the wind immediately picked up around each of the other ships. There was nobody staying behind to collect the bodies this time. I didn't bother to ask questions, and immediately created a strong enough wind to push the ship forward. Thankfully, Akalia again chimed in with helpful wildlife information. There's always a bigger fish, Dale. Sea princes aren't really a hostile species, and would have in fact left your fleet alone. But there's something else that always lurks near a school of princes, and that wouldn't have left you alone. Think of it as a predator that feeds on the sea princes, and anything else that they happen to pass by. That's why sailors never harvest the bodies of sea princes, even though they go out of their way to kill them as quickly as possible. The king of the shallow sea needs his sacrifice. Her ominous words caused me to look back towards the bodies of the sea princes that we were quickly leaving behind us. Even enhancing my sight with ki, I could barely see a dark shadow rising up from beneath where we fought. No doubt it had been lurking at the ocean floor until it smelled the blood of its favorite meal. Just from the size of the dark shadow, I could tell that it absolutely dwarfed the kraken by comparison. The last thing I saw before we were too far away was a giant, clawed hand grasping the slowly rising bodies of a sea prince, pulling it back down beneath the water. However, that was enough for me to see its information. Level 469 Sea Terror. Well, that was aptly named. I'll just leave behind all of my nope, and get the fuck out of here. Expanding my control, I increased the wind pushing at all 12 ships, making the water push us more from behind to keep us going forward without causing us to tip to the sides. O great goddess of hunting and wisdom. Please, for the love of all that is holy, tell me that sea terrors travel alone. I heard a faint giggle in my head in response to that. Typically. Unless it is mating season, in which case between 2 and 5 can travel together at a time. However, a sea terror only mates once every 100 years. And no, before you ask, this one isn't in its mating season. If it were, we wouldn't have had you be part of this voyage, because it would already be doomed to fail. I breathed out a sigh of relief when I heard that, but did not let up on my control of the natural energy. The sun may have already gone down, and I may have been planning to take a rest before, but it was safe to say that I was wide awake now. Yes, I could definitely kill a sea terror if I went all out and used all of my keeper power. Yes, I knew that it was illogical for me to be afraid of it. But, when you see a monster that can swim thousands of meters in mere moments, has hands that can wrap around a small house, and eats sea dragons for a snack, you get out. You get out fast. Still, I had the sinking suspicion that creatures as terrifying as the sea terror would be the norm once we headed into deeper waters. And I did not much like that thought. Not one bit. Chapter 134. Ian's explained. I made sure to maintain my focus on speeding the ships forward for well over an hour, until the strain of that focus began to take a toll on my mind. I could feel a dull headache building, which made me finally relax my control over the wind and water pushing the ships. Though, even after I stopped we kept going. I could only look towards the other ships and assume that they had taken over the burden. Thankful for the respite, I leaned back in my bench and closed my eyes, allowing myself to rest for a little while. I thought back to the journey so far, and felt my consciousness becoming heavy. It had only been one day, yet so much had already happened. When I awoke, it was to the morning light hitting my face, causing me to raise a hand to shield my eyes. Honestly, I hadn't been expecting to be able to sleep at all after seeing the sea terror, so that had been a bit of a surprise to me. Glancing around, I saw that a few other people had just woken up as well, coming up from below deck. At the same time, the nighttime scout descended from the crow's nest to allow the other to take his place. After a bit of investigating, I managed to learn what the 5 lower level people were here for. Well, I say investigating, but really I just watched them do their jobs. As mentioned before, there were 2 scouts. One monitored during the day, and the other did so at night. There was also naturally a chef, a young man who brought me my meals after they were prepared. He seemed rather nice, so I had a pretty good impression of him so far. Next was the carpenter, who kept appraising the condition of the ship after every minor event to ensure that no repairs were needed. Finally, the last of the lower level people was a young felon woman, who seemed just barely into her adult years. Given how she would often walk across the deck and sing, inspiring the other crew members to join her, as well as how she recorded everything in a thick journal, I could only assume that she was a bard. 2 scouts, a chef, a carpenter, and a bard, and then 20 combatants. Was this really enough for everything that we were going to end up facing? I couldn't help but worry, before my gaze turned towards the other ships. It took me a moment to remember that it wasn't really 20 combatants. Rather, it was a little over 100, if my estimations of the other crews was accurate. And these were all among the strongest people that the Beastkin could produce. I got up from my bench with a sigh, moving towards the wheel of the ship where I saw Amana standing, her eyes on the horizon ahead. There were clouds gathering, so I might get to see my first storm soon. But first, I wanted to go talk to her about something. Hold it, Dale. Udona's voice rang in my ears as I had been moving towards her incarnation. Whatever you want to talk with Amana about, it's probably not something that should be mentioned where others can hear, right? I paused in my steps, giving a faint nod. There was a slight sigh after that. She can't leave the wheel right now, and that means that privacy really isn't an option. Best bet would be to just talk to me about it directly. All right. What is up with that kraken from yesterday? I couldn't help but voice the biggest thing that I had been wondering about the entire time. If I had to guess, it should be the equivalent of a monster in the 300s, right? How did you guys manage to make that? There was a hint of pride in Udona's voice as I returned to my bench. That was something Ryon and I came up with. Union summoning. You see, there are 2 methods to binding an eon once it has been created. The first is to bind it to yourself, which is what most summoners do for their primary eon. The second is to bind it to an object. I got to thinking, what would happen if multiple people joined forces to summon the same eon? To test it out, I created the Kraken. It's possible to create an eon beyond one's ability to control, but doing so runs the risk of the eon turning on its creator. But if there are multiple summoners controlling it, you increase the level of control. I nodded my head at that idea. It made a little sense. Sort of. Right. So I split the Kraken into 12 parts when I was done creating it, and bound each one to a cutlass. Though, even like that, we're all still just barely able to keep control of it. Okay. That answered that question, but now, how are eons even created? There was something else that was bugging me about that. Udona's tone suddenly became a bit awkward as she struggled to answer my question. Well, you see, we need a considerable amount of spiritual energy in order to create a strong eon. Udona, what did you do? I couldn't help but worry with how she was saying this. Well, people may have figured out a way to tap into the afterlife, and pull some of the ambient spiritual energy. It's totally safe, though. The connection isn't big enough for anything to come through. And Irena redirected the pathway that summoners use so it only connects to the monster side of the underworld, meaning that there is no danger to the spirits. Hearing her hastily try to explain herself, I groaned slightly, shaking my head. And you are absolutely positive that this connection can't be used as a door for something to come through. You know what's on the other side of that, right? Yeah. Irena already showed me, just to make sure I understood. It's not a pretty sight, Dale. But trust me, even when I was making the Kraken, it only ever pulled a small amount of ambient spiritual energy at a time. It took me hours to get enough to actually work with. Maybe summoners at a higher level can establish a larger connection, but it's not possible with what Earth has right now. I felt like I'd need to get a second opinion on that later. But, given the fact that the system hadn't alerted me to another one of the Chimera souls breaking out of the afterlife, I had to believe that she was right. I knew that something had to be strange with summoners, due to my experience seeing how much spiritual energy it took to create a body. If it were before I created the world spirits, that would be one thing. But now, most of the residual spiritual energy in the world would have been soaked up by them, so there would be nothing left for summoners to use. Though, this did raise an interesting idea for me. Udona, what determines how much control a summoner has over their eon? Unfortunately, the response that I got back was not what I was expecting. Dale, I know what you want to really ask, so let me stop you right there. An eon that is bound to a person resides in their personal spirit realm. Where you have Leo in, you might be able to bind one to an item like I did, but it wouldn't be worth it. Before I could question why she thought that, she took the initiative to explain. In order to control an eon that's strong, you'd need to release a good portion of your keeper levels to make up for the lacking summoner levels. By that point, you'd already be stronger than the eon you summon. You can keep an eon or two in reserve for the games later on, but it'd probably be best to wait till your available summoner level was high enough, or have it divided among many parts. She raised a valid point. I had simply been considering the kind of creature that I'd be able to summon if I brought out all my keeper levels. However, I still don't have an accurate grasp of my own strength when I am powered up like that. Like she said, it's very possible that I'd be quite a bit more powerful than any Eon that I could control in that state. Though, now I had another idea. Have either of you considered creating a union summoning like this, but on a larger scale? The idea of an army unit working together to jointly summon one massive creature flashed in my mind. My question was answered with an almost joyous laughter. I knew there was something that Sis saw in you. Yeah, Ryan and I are still thinking about doing that, and it was the original idea behind all of this. The Kraken can be considered the prototype. Once the Beastkin and Elves joined together, we wanted to use the Kraken to fuel the passions of the next generation of summoners. I nodded my head slightly, admiring how far ahead Udona and Ryan were planning this. Out of curiosity, how strong of an Eon can Amana control on her own? Her personal Eon is mostly just a messenger. Something she can send over short distances when voice transmission isn't enough. But as for the limits for her, it'd be a bit below the level of one Sea Prince. As I considered that, I let my eyes move towards the horizon again. The clouds that I had spotted before had begun to gather, yet the crew of the ship didn't seem the least bit worried. When I looked back, even Amana herself had a carefree smile on her face while she sailed us directly towards the gathering storm. Okay. So nobody is concerned. Makes sense. Druids should be able to protect the ships from the storms. No pressure at all, right? Once again, I got up and moved towards Amana, passing by the happily singing bard as she danced around the mast. No, she was not pole dancing, so get that thought out of your head. Captain. What's the matter? Amana called out from behind the wheel as she looked down at me from her elevated deck. There wouldn't happen to be any large monsters that we have to be wary about that like to hang around in storms? I asked, glancing meaningfully towards the storm that we were approaching. She seemed to give it some serious thought. Haven't the foggiest. She grinned broadly as she declared that, nearly making me stumble back. We've never had need to go out past the Sea Prince's territory. Your little stunt with getting us out of there put us ahead of schedule by near a full day. Nice goin' with that, by the way. Guessin', ye caught a glimpse of the beast below. I gave a somewhat stiff nod to confirm that. So, we basically have no idea what we'll be running into from now on. Completely uncharted territories from day 2 onwards. Amana responded with a wide grin. Unknown monsters and dangers behind every turn of the tide. Lands unseen awaiting past every horizon. Isn't that the best part? Doesn't it make her heart burn for adventure? Well, it makes my heart burn, all right. I grumbled slightly at that, shaking my head. Please tell me that one of these ships has a shaman or something. Amana nodded her head. She turned to glance at the ship directly to our right, one of the inner 3. The jaded lady be carryin' a shaman. He's in charge of findin' any land along our course. The jaded lady. I let out a small groan when I heard the name of one of the other ships in this fleet. Well, as long as we did have a dedicated shaman, that meant that things would be a bit easier on the journey. I couldn't help but glance back, my eyes looking towards the dark clouds as they gradually approached closer. Chapter 135. Through the Eye of the Storm. Content with the answers that Amana had given me, I returned to my seat near the front of the ship. Looking out at the horizon, I could tell that it would only be a few hours before we would hit the growing storm. Assuming that it wasn't moving towards us, at least. That gave me plenty of time to sit here. I mean, really, there's not that much for me to do personally, aside from making sure that the ship doesn't capsize. Well, and training to get better at not making the ship capsize. At least for now. Though, that did give me an idea. A way to train that I hadn't considered before. Closing my eyes, I once again formed ice beneath the water. However, this time there were 5 blocks of ice instead of 1. If I combine my 1,000 arms training with this, maybe I'll be able to adjust a bit faster. Well, that was the idea, at least. So, until we hit the storm, I pressed down all 5 blocks of ice in different directions, focusing on keeping them down as low as I could. While I wasn't sure how effective the training was, it was definitely a great distraction. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. The ocean was a vast and beautiful wonderland of life, yet also terrible. The number of creatures within the land and sky combined could not equal those that swam in the sea. And now, deep beneath the ocean's surface, a wondrous change was happening. One which could reshape the oceans forever. Far, far below the surface of the water, where even the light of day could barely shine, there were vast mountains and plains, coral trees that towered high and formed thick forests. Fish large and small swam through the coral forests, scattering as one of the dominant races of the sea floor walked upon the bottom. Thick mud spread out with its every step, its soft yet strong body easily resisting the pressure of the deep. With the passing of the recent sea terror, this creature could finally leave its underwater cave. Its large, round eyes scanned the surroundings. Its limbs were long and thin, tiny blue scales covering its skin. Between the fingers of its hands and the toes of its feet was a small webbed surface, allowing it to easily move through the water. The creature's back had a large fin that went all the way down, tapering off as it met the thick tail that extended from the base of its spine. When it looked up, the clouds within the water caused by the passing of the terror obscured its sight. Yet, at the same time, its vision was able to make out strange shapes in the distance. Far above where the creature had ever gone, it could see what appeared to be a school of coral bodies moving along the surface. Closer, however, it could see 5 unusual shapes floating in the water, swimming downwards as if competing to see which could go lower. Its curiosity was great, but so was its caution. Before moving closer, the creature turned its elongated head to scan the sea in all directions, ensuring that there were no predators that would eat it when it left the ocean floor. Seeing that there appeared to be nothing, the creature prepared to swim up. Before it could, however, there was a disturbance nearby. Just off the cliff of the plain where the creature was walking was the ocean that lay beneath the ocean. Thick, green water spread out from the base of the cliff, all the way into the distance where another rising mountain cut it off. An upward splash in the water emerged as another creature similar to the first emerged, drawn by the curiosity sensed from its peer. The two creatures looked at each other, tilting their heads side to side as they shared a nonverbal dialogue. Afterwards, the two creatures kicked off from the ground in unison, their large eyes looking upwards as they first approached the 5 hovering shapes. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Orvie's voice suddenly entered my mind, breaking my focus from my training. I could see that we were close to the storm, but given how excited she was sounding, that was likely not the reason that she was messaging me. What's up, Rivy? Mermaids. Real, honest to me mermaids. Well, sorta. Underwater people. A new race. Sis says that they're just on the verge of gaining sapience. She practically squealed at that, though that's not quite what I was focusing on. They're nearby, aren't they? Or Ivy was likely watching my voyage, so if she saw mermaids. There was a brief giggle before her answer followed. One of them just grabbed onto your ice block. They're not mean. They don't seem it, at least. Gah, no. The storm is scaring them away. Just as her message ended, the water began to quickly grow restless. In the span of a dozen breaths, waves began to form in front of us, each easily as big as the Jolly Dodger. Lightning crackled within the clouds, and I could feel the wind pushing against my control. Here be a proper storm, lads. Amana shouted out with a laugh from behind the wheel of the ship. Tiber, we be countin' on ye here. As she said that, she didn't even hesitate to drive straight into a wave that was easily 100 meters tall. Furrowing my brow, I focused on connecting with the natural energy around us. I could feel each of the other 11 druids doing the same, and together we formed a bubble around the fleet. Rain crashed against the top of the bubble, sliding down along it. Waves split apart as we moved through, unable to deter us. In our bubble, the ocean was at peace, yet the world around us was in chaos. At times, our bubble would be completely submerged while the tide crashed around us, making us focus on keeping our fleet secure from all sides. A single gap would mean the ocean comes crashing down upon us. Other times, we would be suspended in the air, struggling to maintain our control on the water to keep it from falling down. This was easily the bigger strain, as it required causing 12 ships in a large patch of water to stay afloat based on will alone. If there was anything to be happy about, it was that there were no monsters within the storm. We passed by giant whirlpools, and tornadoes that descended upon the ocean, but not a single creature was seen. It was as if there was a tacit understanding not to get in the way of a storm in the ocean. Over time, the coordination between myself and the 12 druids began to grow stronger. We were able to better cover the gaps in each other's control, and sometimes combined forces well enough to allow one to take a break and recover their mental fortitude. Of course, they wouldn't let me do that, since I was known to be the big shot among the druids. Every time we overcame a wave, or reunited with the surface of the ocean, or lightning bounced around the bubble, there was a loud cheer from each of the ships. The bigger the potential threat, the more our Audience erupted in praise. The biggest threat was no doubt also the only one that received no applause. A giant waterspout towered before us, rapidly moving in our direction. Even with all 12 of us working together, it was difficult to hold the winds back before we hit the great tornado of water. Yet, at the same time, it was too large for us to navigate around, and moving closer to us faster than we could hope to avoid it. We could only watch as it came upon us, bigger and more terrifying than any monster. So, there was just one thing that we could do to save us all. It was hard to tell who had the idea first. I could feel someone nudging us lower, and then all 12 of us hurriedly lowered the ships beneath the surface, forming a bubble of air around the fleet. Even below the surface, the water was still violent, yet easier to deal with than the hurricane force winds on the surface. For the first time in our journey, the ships began to rock unsteadily with the force of the currents leaking through our makeshift barrier. The worst of it was when the waterspout actually passed directly over us. The water that had been shielding us from the storm was pulled away. We almost weren't able to withstand it, when Leowin suddenly woke up within my spiritual realm. Let me out, Dad. I furrowed my brows for a moment, but soon gave a sharp nod. Leowin's spiritual energy began to transmit along my arms while I struggled to hold the powerful winds and currents at bay. I manifest the storm. As soon as I heard her voice, I knew what she had in mind. The storm was one of the northern constellations, within the sky of the Arab. And as the dotted outline of a cloud and thunderbolt formed on silver gauntlets around my fists, I felt the strain lessen. The storm allows Leowin and I to control wind and lightning, with either my mana or Leowin's spiritual energy. And right now, Leowin was using her own energy to control the wind, keeping it from interfering with us while the rest of us focused purely on the water. With my hands raised towards the sky, they began to shine like a beacon. I could feel Leowin becoming weaker as she burned her energy to use her power, so I pushed us forward faster, until we were out from under the waterspout. Only then did the light of my gauntlets die down, before fading into mist as Leowin returned to my spiritual world. I could sense that she was all right, merely exhausted from the overuse of her energy. This time, there was no loud cheer. Even after we surfaced again on the other side of the waterspout, a stunned silence fell over the fleet. This was likely the first time that most anyone in the fleet had seen something like that. Those more sensitive to energies were no doubt able to tell that I had not used mana, or natural energy to divert the wind. Some might even think that I was a summoner, like the captains. Ooh, item Ian's, now there's an idea. Udona's voice rang out in response to my thought, and I had to mentally shoo her away while I glanced around. Thankfully, the waterspout had been near the end of the storm, so the water was again beginning to calm around us. Good show, lad, Amana shouted out after a long moment, though she wasn't met with the usual cheers. Well, aside from the bard, who was just trying to stir up the crowd. Take a while to rest. Ye did good work, and we can take care of ourselves for a couple hours. She looked at me knowingly, seeming to understand just how much it drained myself and the other druids to keep the fleet safe through the storm. I nodded my head slightly to her, falling back against my bench and closing my eyes. In all honesty, my head felt like it was about to split open. However, there was a bright side. Druid has leveled up. Druid has leveled up. Druid has leveled up. Druid has leveled up. Ellipsis. Spirit Hunter has leveled up. Pirate has been unlocked. Star Navigation ability unlocked. Yes, another 5 levels in Druid, 2 in Spirit Hunter, and unlocking the Pirate class was definitely a bright side. 8 levels for navigating through a storm, worth. Chapter 136. The Man Who Would Not Be King. Honestly, it wasn't just me. All of the druids had practically collapsed once the storm had finished passing. I couldn't feel anyone tampering with the natural energy around the ships, so every captain had likely given their druids a break. Though, to say that I was completely allowed to rest was also a lie. Mind if I join you for a little bit? I heard a soft female voice speaking to me while I had my eyes closed, and recognized it as the ship's bard. I gave a slight nod of approval, and felt the blanket beneath me shift slightly as she sat down. That was really cool, what you did with the tornado. She admired, though I kept my eyes closed. I figure it's probably one of your secrets, so I won't ask how you did it. I just thought you might like someone to talk to, since you're always by yourself. If only you knew just how wrong you were, I thought inwardly, but shook my head. It's fine. But, might I ask, why are you here? Surely, there were bards that had more time to practice their trade, so you couldn't have been the strongest bard. There was a moment of hesitation before she answered, but I could tell that she was talking with a grin from the happier tone she used. Ah, guess that you didn't hear about who all is on the mission, then. You're right, there are plenty more talented bards than myself. We actually debated on who to bring for a while. In the end, it came down to a simple decision. We didn't need a bard for their combat abilities, but their ability to accurately document events and support the crew. At the same time, it was decided that a member of nobility had to accompany the mission to see it through. I'm not quite sure how I managed it, but I raised an eyebrow without opening my eyes. There was a light laugh from next to me, before she continued. So, allow me to introduce myself. Princess Disney, fourth in line for the third throne of Terraria. Okay, that got me to open my eyes, her name as much as the fact that she was actually a princess. Something that I had learned recently was how the kingdoms had shifted over the generations. There were still the four kingdoms of Akal, Terraria, Keliop, and Udonia, but now there were three of each. Even though the kingdoms weren't connected, they took the same name. The first kingdom of Akal was the northernmost country on the Beastkin continent, followed by the first kingdom of Uronia, the first kingdom of Keliop, and then repeating, all the way down to the third kingdom of Keliop. Being the heir to the third throne meant that her mother was the third queen, the one that had sent me the quest to join the mission. I swear, I had nothing to do with this. I heard Tara's voice quickly enter my ear. Disney isn't one of mine, nor is her mom. I couldn't help but nod slightly. So, how much do you know about me? I asked quietly, glancing towards Disney, who smiled happily. About as much as anyone else, really. Word travels on silver wings, you know. I know that you've always pretty much been alone, and nobody really knows where you came from. But when we were looking for the best druid, your name was the only one anyone could think of. There might be stronger druids out there, but they stay hidden from the world, so we never hear about them. Honestly, I had been a bit skeptical about how strong you were. No offense, but you really just look like an old geezer. I can't feel all that much power coming off of you like I can with people like Kelly. But maybe that's just how things are with druids. But, when you did that whatever it was before, I could definitely feel your power. So, I have a request. I glanced at her curiously while she placed her hands in her lap and looked at me with a wide grin. Will you be my husband? Processing. Processing. Unable to compute. Initiating reboot sequence. I'm sorry, what? I could faintly feel Tara gritting her teeth in the back of my mind, though that might have been my imagination. Disney nodded her head quickly, not showing the slightest signs of embarrassment. It's always been tradition in the royal families to marry strong individuals, that way the strongest child can be produced. You might be a Lycan, so we wouldn't really be able to have kids, but if you become my husband then you can meet with the Lycan princesses, and maybe even their queens. Processing. Unable to compute. Thanks, but don't you think that I'm a bit too old? Please, for the love of all that is holy, why must you tempt me like this? I mean, yes, Disney is cute. Who wouldn't think that a golden-haired, curvy catgirl was cute? But I already had enough on my plate as it is. She thought about that for a moment, but then shook her head. People at the pinnacle are still able to conceive children even when they reach their 80s. Even longer if they're a monk, and I can feel a faint bit of ki in you. So it shouldn't be a problem. Well, I appreciate the offer, but I'm spoken for, already. By the goddess you worship, who is probably busy coming up with horrible things to happen to you the longer this conversation goes on. Spoken for. She tilted her head in confusion, before a look of understanding flashed across her face. Oh, you mean you already have a wife? That's only natural. She nodded her head again. Any man or woman worth wanting is wanted by many. If you want, you can bring her with you. I'm sure Mom won't mind. It took me a long moment to remember just what kind of culture the Beastkin had. Apparently, it wasn't unusual for one person to have many spouses, and their many spouses to have many more. Why wasn't that included in the background information? Akalia coughed awkwardly within my mind. Well, how was I supposed to know you'd be hit on as soon as you met a young woman? Seriously, Orivy is the goddess of love, not us. Speaking of, I had no hand in this. Orivy's high-pitched voice joined Akalia's in my mind. Since when did my head become a conference call? She doesn't love you or anything like that, really. Well, not right now. Royal marriages are weird in the different cultures. Usually love doesn't develop until after they get together. Let's get this voyage over with, and save any topics like that for after it's all over, agreed. I looked at Disney, who had been patiently waiting for a reply to her proposal. Oddly enough, I could hear Kelly suddenly break out laughing from below deck. Guess she's more deeply connected to her incarnation than Udona is. Sure. I know about Mom promising you nobility if this all works, so there shouldn't be any problems with it from any side. Who knows, if we find an uncharted land, I might become queen of it, with you as my first king. She grinned happily at that idea as she stood up, leaving me in a daze while she walked back towards the mast. I could hear a faint humming from her while her tail swayed behind her. Terra, no planning any catastrophes for her future. As soon as I sent that thought out, I could vaguely feel the sensation of a child being caught with their hand in a cookie jar. But I wasn't going to do something like that, honest. Maybe just a tiny little sprained ankle, or a small stampede. Nothing serious. No. Bad goddess of fate. I'm not going to be doing anything with her. I mean, seriously, I've got enough girls on my plate as it is. After this is all over, and I go back to the admin room, the most that will happen is that my host takes her up on the offer. But it's not like I'd be coming back down in his lifetime. I let out a long sigh after I sent that message off, closing my eyes once again. Alright. Fine. But I can't be blamed if something bad does happen to her, and I didn't do it. Deal. Now can all of you please be quiet for a few minutes? My head is still killing me. Thankfully, they went quiet after I asked that, allowing me to rest in peace for a little while. Thankfully, the journey through the ocean was surprisingly easy after the first few days. After we passed by the storm, we didn't hit a single monster, all the way until we found a small island the next day. It wasn't a large island, and certainly not the same one that Orivy's dungeon was on. Nonetheless, we dropped anchor and approached the island. Once we were there, each of the 12 druids created a gate on the island that led back to the mainland. With the portal established, I was able to see my first glimpse of Amana's personal Aeon. Amana stood in front of the swirling vortex of water that had risen from the ocean at the shore, and simply extended her hand. Go and send the report. She muttered, a white cross appearing on the back of her hand. Just like when she summoned the Kraken, the white cross shot out from her hand, turning into a small-sized version of herself, if she was a foot tall and hand-white, feathery wings. The small Amana smiled as she flew through the portal, while Amana herself closed her eyes. Best be keeping the portal open till she gets back. She spoke out, just loud enough for me to hear. With that instruction, I shrugged my shoulders, simply keeping the portal open until the little Aeon came back an hour or so later. All right. Good to go. She smiled, causing the Aeon to return to its symbol form, and fly into her body again. We bet not needin' any supplies, so there be no point in us stickin' around here. Our journey takes us to much wider shores. As she said that, she glanced around the island, which was smaller than even the Jolly Dodger. Hopefully, much wider. She grinned a bit, shaking her head before leading us back to the ships. Back aboard the ships, our journey continued. We met many strange and powerful creatures along our way, but the careful preparation of the beastkin assured that none of the ships had been damaged beyond repair. Just over a week into the journey, we had encountered a giant bird which flew in storm clouds, controlling the storms to attack at random. The mages aboard the various ships proved able to shoot it down while we kept the ships afloat. A few days later, we thought that we found another island, only for it to be the back of a great two-headed turtle. Our monks and fighters leapt onto the shell of the turtle as it tried to attack the outer ships in the formation, and jointly brought it down. This was the first time any of the ships actually needed repaired. The further into the ocean we went, the larger the creatures became. But at the same time, they came more and more seldomly. That said, the islands that we encountered likewise became more and more rare. Roughly 2 months at sea after we had left, we had finally found an island, but it was too far away from any other that we had encountered to form a portal. Even though we had been establishing portal locations at each island we passed, the chain had been broken after only a short 2 months. With this, we were now truly on our own. Granted, if this were a normal journey, we would have been on our own from the moment we left dock, so this wasn't as big of a blow to me as it was to those who had been hoping to establish a portal chain the entire distance of our trip. One of our warriors, Kieran, voiced out his worries when they realized what this meant. What are we going to do now, Captain Boat? We don't have any way to contact home or request supplies anymore. I glanced around, and I saw a few people who seemed to show similar concerns, as well as others who were completely unfazed by the matter. Amana, on the other hand, laughed. Ha, and, what's our point? Did ye think that we'd be gettin' everything handed to us? Nay, We brought all these supplies with us because we knew that we'd be getting cut off. Sooner or later, bound to happen. As for contact, the only contact that they be truly needin' is to know whether we are alive, dead, or have reached our goal. Isn't that right, Disney? The golden-haired catgirl nodded with a smile. That's right, Captain. Saying that, she reached into her bag and pulled out 2 papers, holding each one firmly while displaying them so that we could see. My mother gave me 2 quests before we left, so that she could track our progress. One will be completed upon my death, and the other, like all of yours, will be completed when we settle on a new land. With that explanation done, she promptly put the 2 papers back in her satchel. If we manage to find a new land, then our home will find a way to communicate with us. But if we die, then the ocean is still a far too dangerous place for us to cross, and this idea will be abandoned until a new method is found. Her words caused the atmosphere of the ship to sink, the realization that we were truly on our own settling into those on the ship. I could see some shifting back and forth, glancing towards the other crew members uncertainly. Good grief. Find out we can't phone home for 2 minutes, and people are already growing paranoid. Grumbling, I infused mana into my voice, still sitting in my bench while I turned back to look out to sea. We can't contact home, but what does that matter? We came on this journey to make a new home. And I won't let anyone get in the way of that. If you don't think you can behave, I'll send you off the ship now. We can see how well you fare on your own. I could feel the gazes of the crew turning towards me, but there wasn't a single voice of complaint. Leowyn had long since woken up again, her energy fully restored. If there were people that insisted on a fight, I wouldn't mind bringing her out again, or activating one of the other classes to settle things. That was actually kinda cool. I could faintly hear Orivy speaking in my mind as we left the island, once again on our journey. Please tell me we're reaching your dungeon soon. I want to stretch my legs. There was a faint laugh in response to my hope. Just a few more days now, and you'll be there. I think you'll like how it's grown. Chapter 137. Welcome to the dungeon. Just as Orivy promised, it was less than a week before we came across another strange event. The weather was fair, not a cloud to be seen, and the crew was happily singing aboard the deck of the Jolly Dodger. The king will take his tribute, the king will take his due. Disney started them off, a wide grin on her face before the rest of the crew echoed in chorus. With the blood of princes flowing, the king stands true. She nodded her head, jumping back and hooking a leg on the rope ladder on the central mast, lightly swaying about while her body captivated the eyes of the crew. Beneath the ocean deep, beneath the ebb and flow. Another chorus followed her words, as if mesmerized by the sight of her body and the sound of her voice. I could faintly feel an energy behind her voice, a faint divine energy that caused me to raise an eyebrow. Bards could eventually produce divine energy of their own, albeit only a small drop compared to the endless oceans of the gods. The king shall watch the traveler, watching from his throne. Disney let out a loud laugh, easily scaling the ladder and jumping from it to stand atop the boom of the sail. She grabbed a nearby rope, standing steadily as she stared down at the crew. Let loose your sails, let fly your spells, the prince is coming soon. And if the king shall find you, the prince will spell your. The chorus began to shout out once again, more energetically with each verse, before they were suddenly interrupted. What? Amana's outburst nearly made Disney lose her balance, but she didn't even seem to notice. Saru. She glanced down to the scout that had been joining in the singing on the deck. Up in the nest. Turn your eyes to the port. Saru blinked in confusion, but didn't hesitate to obey the order. He easily scaled the rope ladder, moving to his perch in the basket above. Turning to the left, he focused his eyes out into the distance. Captain, we've got land, he shouted down in surprise, and he was right to be surprised. This was the first island that the shaman had not been able to locate ahead of time. However, that revelation only made Amana laugh in excitement. All ships, hard to port. She shouted out, her voice infused with mana. We got an island that can't be seen by nature, and ye know what that means. A dungeon. Not only Amana's voice, but several voices from the crew and nearby ships shouted out in surprise, all at once. Amana didn't have to repeat herself again, and the wind suddenly shifted, every ship making a hard left to change course towards the island. We gave each other a wide berth so as not to crash, but aside from that we were making a beeline to the distant island. Finally, I thought to myself with a smile, and soon I was able to realize just how Amana had discovered the dungeon island in the first place. Just a few minutes after we had turned, I felt my connection with the natural energy cut off. Naturally, This caught me by surprise, until I remembered that a dungeon's ambient mana blocked off natural energy. And indeed, I could sense a thin mana permeating the atmosphere. Yet, looking out ahead, all that could be seen was a small island, barely 100 meters in diameter. It was like a flat rock surface had been carved out just a few inches above sea level, with only one distinct feature. At the center of the island, a large cube of stone broke the flat surface, no more than 10 meters thick. On the side of the stone facing us, an ornately carved stone door was held tightly shut. Huh, Rivy really did good work if it can carve a door like that. I nodded my head as I saw that, smiling inwardly. Judging by the atmosphere of the crew, it was easy to see that the beastkin greatly valued dungeons. It was to such a degree that they took a detour on such an important mission to investigate one. Surround the dungeon and drop anchor, men. Amana shouted out, and the 12 ships began to form a circle around the small island, each dropping off large boulders from their sides. Surprisingly, the water was not very deep here, and they had to tie off the anchors once they hit the bottom to remove the slack. All ashore, that's going ashore. At her cry, the entire crew jumped off the ship excitedly. Many landed directly on the island, while others had to swim a short distance. As for myself, I used my key to enhance my jump, allowing me to land alongside Kelly. Look what we got here, she said with a grin, looking at the stone cube. Seems to be our lucky day. One of the other captains said as he pulled himself out of the water. This one was a felon man with a strong build, yet he hadn't been able to make the jump all the way to the island. We hadn't been expecting to find something like this here. The other captains likewise had to pull themselves out of the water. Oddly enough, not a single one had trained as a monk. Though, it did make sense given that they were all summoners. The last to shake herself dry was Amana, who smiled broadly as she looked around. This be a great opportunity for us, lads. Yet, we can't be too hasty. No tellin' if something might come out of the waters while we're inside. Best to only send in a small group. The other captains all nodded in agreement. Who will go, then? The muscular felon captain asked in excitement. Calm yourself, man. Amana laughed loudly, shaking her head. We captains'd be useless in the dungeon. Passages too narrow for the Kraken. The other captains all drooped with disappointment at the realization that they wouldn't be joining. We'll be on the defensive side. Each captain, choose one or two to represent your ship for the search team. The rest'll stay behind. There was an instant clamor of people vying for the limited positions. In fact, the only ones that were staying quiet were the scouts and other crew members that had yet to reach the level limit. They seemed to realize that they wouldn't be so useful in a fight. I had no doubt that Udona would ensure that I was chosen, so instead I walked up towards the door, glancing over it curiously. It was a double door, each side having waving patterns carved along it, as if two tsunamis were going to crash into the center. At the top of the door, I could see a row of words, surprisingly written in English. In my surprise, I found myself muttering as I read. The Four Elements Dungeon. I blinked in confusion, before noticing that the noise behind me had suddenly quieted down. Turning to look, I found everyone staring directly at me. Ye can read the words, boy? An Ursa captain asked, his ears twitching slightly. Right. Super hearing. Well, it doesn't really matter, it fits with the whole mysterious sage figure I was going for. I simply nodded my head in response. I've spent some time studying dungeons. A brief murmur arose between the crew members, before Amana broke out with a laugh. That settles it, then. Tiber will represent the Jolly Dodger, along with Kelly. An element dungeon would likely be quite good for an elemental monk. There were several other people who nodded along in agreement, and soon the team was set. In total, 20 people had been chosen, further divided into two teams of 10. The vanguard group included myself and Kelly, 2 mages, 2 warriors, a scout, a barbarian, an archer, and a monk. The second group actually included 3 clerics, 2 priests, 2 swordsmen, a summoner, and 2 knights. Aside from the scout, the entire group had hit the current level limit. This gave us a great confidence in being able to clear out whatever monsters could be lurking within. Even if we encountered a level 400 monster, it wouldn't be impossible for us to kill it, without me even needing to use my keeper abilities. While the rest of the group was discussing the plan for how to handle the defense of the outside, I sent a message up to Terra. Oh, great goddess of stories, spin me a tale. Why does this dungeon have English writing? Unofficial dungeon language? Terra asked a moment later with a light laugh. Most of the dungeons can't learn the nuances of a language before the language naturally shifts into something else. Their learning ability is just too low, combined with all of the other subjects they have to be taught. So, since you put us in charge of the dungeons, we decided to make the dungeons share a universal language, yours. Several races are already calling it the Holy Script, or Devil's Writing, depending on how they see dungeons. And before you ask, yes, it was intentional that we didn't tell you. We were hoping you wouldn't resist reading it out loud. Otherwise, why would they send a druid into a dungeon? You would have just ended up being told to wait outside and have to come back on your own another time. I listened to her explanation, offering a faint nod in response. All right. But next time, can you at least give me a warning? I understand liking to surprise me, but still. Fine, fine. Party pooper. Tara grumbled, and I turned around to see the rest of the first group approaching me. Since I was able to read the language of the dungeons, I had been nominated the de facto leader of the group. The plan itself was really simple. We scout ahead and clear out any dangers, and the second team comes in to treat any wounds and keep our backs defended. Let's get going. I spoke quietly as I turned and began to walk towards the dungeon, our scout Knox to my side. As we approached, the double doors began to slowly open, revealing a circular staircase leading down. Lifting a hand, I cast a simple light spell, causing a glowing orb to float just above my palm. This was one of the easiest spells to cast, so nobody really seemed to even pay attention to it. I wouldn't be surprised if almost everyone here were able to cast it as well. After stepping foot onto the staircase, I took a glance over the edge, trying to see how deep it went. Maybe 200 meters. I thought my estimation inwardly, but since there was no sign of a monster, we simply continued onwards. The walls of the corridor around us were completely smooth, the stairs just damp enough that we had to make the walk slowly. However, after descending a few dozen meters, I grew rather annoyed with the slight mana expenditure of the light spell, not wanting to waste the limited resource. So, I decided to show a bit of my hand to the others, speaking in English. Can you give us a bit more lighting? Some of us can't see in the dark. Rather than a verbal answer, the darkness of the corridor simply faded away, as if the entire dungeon had cast a light spell on itself. Thank you. I spoke up again, dismissing my own spell and doing my best to ignore the glances I could feel against my back. Down and down our party went, the dim light offered a welcome respite. Neither the druid nor spirit hunter classes enhanced mana in any way, so I wasn't quite willing to waste what little I had on such simple matters. Before too long, we had finally reached the bottom of the staircase, and a smooth floor greeted us. Directly in front of us was another door, this one marked by an ornate carving of fire. Looks like this is where the dungeon adventure really begins. Chapter 138. We've got gunning flames. The scout briefly stepped up to the door, looking it over. Doesn't seem trapped anywhere. No hidden mechanisms or set spells, so it should be safe. After saying that, he stepped back, allowing me to push open the door. The room behind was much wider than I had expected, roughly 30 meters across, and 50 deep. The dim light of the dungeon cast flickering glares off of moving forms along the walls and floors. Red, viscous slimes slowly crawling along. Slimes. Is that it? My daughter's got one of these as a pet. One of our mages, a woman named Jaren, spoke up in disappointment. Does hers shoot fire? I asked, glancing at the information of the slime. Level 38 fire slime. Wait, what? She asked, confused, before quickly erecting a barrier in front of us, just in time to block two small fireballs. Since when can slimes do that? It wasn't anything to really worry about, since the slimes were still weak compared to our group. However, it appeared that Jaren had been caught off guard by the new breed of slime. Meanwhile, my eyes focused on a rather discreet slime slowly shifting among the others, this one with a somewhat deeper red than the others. Level 112 Fire Key Slime. Well, that explains it. I gave a low sigh, remembering the two slimes that I had once given to Orivy after practicing my elemental key. It would seem that they had multiplied considerably. Orivy, please tell me that there is a secret room to keep a few slimes safe. Don't want to destroy everything in the dungeon and leave it with nothing. Oh, it's fine. Orivy called back to my prayer with a happy tone. Population preservation is the first lesson we teach dungeons nowadays. They all have a breeding ground hidden somewhere to make sure that they don't easily run out. Though, it may take a little while to repopulate, but the dungeons just don't offer treasure during that time as an incentive to let them grow up. I nodded my head, glad that the lightning and ice spells being cast at the slimes wouldn't result in the total extinction of the species. Shouldn't we take one in for study? Jaren asked, doing her best to stop the other mage from killing them all before she had her chance. If you brought a jar big enough to contain one, sure. He said casually, though obviously didn't believe that she did, seeing how he continued firing off spells. But, she turned to look at the slimes sadly. True, we can at least bring their cores back, though. After saying that, she joined in the assault. The slimes had no way to resist the spells of the powerful mages, save for one. Hidden amidst the destruction, the single fire key slime kept creeping closer. When a stray ice spell hit it, its health bar appeared above its head, showing that it had taken only a tenth of its health as damage. Before the two mages could notice the ineffectiveness of their spell, it shot up off the ground, impacting against the mana barrier that they had erected. What the? Jaren shouted out as she felt her shield being quickly burnt away by the fire mana. This is where I step in. HYA. Kelly took a step forward with a grin, an orange flame wrapping around her fist as she lowered her stance. Her fists came together, knuckle to knuckle, and she punched forward. There was an orange flash as the slime practically exploded, bits of goo flying in all directions. Once the room was cleared, a section of the wall opened up, revealing a shabby wooden chest that slid out. Once the wall closed behind it, the party carefully approached. Never seen a dungeon offer a treasure like that. Jaren smiled, her eyes practically gleaming. Nox once again went up and inspected the shoddy chest. No traps, though I can feel some magic from inside of it. After saying that, he once again backed up. This time, it was the other mage who opened the chest, casting a spell to remotely lift the lid. Seeing that nothing attacked, Nox went forward to retrieve the contents. Let's see. There's a short sword, 2 copper arrows, and a pair of pants. He pulled the items out one by one, setting them on the ground. Tiber, mind identifying them for us? He asked, beckoning me forward. I had a confused look on my face for a moment, wondering what he meant, until I saw it. On the shafts of each arrow, as well as the blade of the sword, there were words written. The dungeons likely do this to make it easier for them to sort the treasures. They all have fire abilities, I said, seeing the word fire written on all 3. The sword is also a blade built to channel elemental ki, specifically fire element. In truth, what was written on the sword was fire key blade, while the arrows simply had fire arrow written on them. Nox nodded, and then picked up the pants to show me. The pants were dark orange with flaming red patterns along it, so it was no surprise when I spoke up. These have some resistance to fire. Pretty good haul for the first room. Kelly spoke with a small grin, glancing towards the 2 doors on the other side of the room. One had the same flame design as the door we had just come through, while the other had a swirling pattern that likely indicated air. And now we have multiple choices. By now, the second group was entering the room as well, and looked surprised at the small pile of loot that had been set out. This is a generous dungeon, one of the clerics spoke with a faint nod. Any injuries? Everyone shook their heads in unison, prompting me to explain. Just a slime room, though they were a new type. Really now? The cleric's eyes practically shone as he helped the others move around to gather the various monster cores that had been discarded. Each one was no larger than a pebble, so it took a little while to find all of them. Once we had the items packed away in separate bags, we returned our attention to the 2 doors. If there's another fire room, that probably would make the enemies in the next room stronger fire-type enemies. Jaren stated, nodding her head. Whereas the other door probably has flying enemies, going by the design. Nox went up to both of the doors, checking them over and informing us that neither appeared to be anything more than simple doors. Seeing that, I moved towards the flaming door first. Let's see where this one leads, and we can check the other paths later. Beyond the door was a long hallway, about 15 meters forward before it took a sharp turn to the left. The second group stayed behind again as the rest of us moved forward, Nox standing in front to look for any hidden dangers. As we moved forward, the room seemed to heat up more and more, and we saw a red glow coming from the room ahead of us. Unlike before, there was no door this time, just a large room at the end of the hall. Inside stood a single figure, roughly 3 meters tall. Its skin was translucent, its features impossible to read. It simply looked like a giant, bipedal blob with a network of flaming veins running through it. And for good reason. Level 248 King Fire Slime. Yes, it was another slime, this time a big one. That can't be a slime too, right? Jaren asked, her voice trembling, either out of fear or excitement, or both. Looks that way. I grumbled. I closed my eyes, letting my ki flow through me. I couldn't compare to someone specializing in the monk class, but my high wisdom stat made it so that I had over 10 times more ki than I had mana. And while that still wasn't enough to properly fight against a mini-boss level entity with my main class, sealed, it would at least offer me some protection. Well, guess this is where we get serious. Jaren spoke, turning towards the other mage. The two nodded at each other as the giant fire slime stepped forward. 3 sets of magic circles appeared in the air, one in front of each mage, while the third was actually in front of the slime itself. Okay, so it can use magic, that's new. That said, I was able to recognize the spell it was using as the most basic fireball, just pumped full of enough mana that it created a small inferno. On the other hand, the 2 spells fired by the mages created icy winds and thick chunks of ice that assaulted the slime. After going through the icy wind, the remaining power behind the fireball wasn't enough to break the mage's barrier spell, leaving us behind it unharmed. However, it also weakened their attacks enough that they didn't even reach the slime. I glanced towards the archer, and noticed that he was already knocking an arrow. Closing his eyes, his lips moved in a way that seemed to be repeating a mnemonic phrase, his arrow slowly beginning to glow. I could feel mana pushing into the tip of the arrowhead, so he was no doubt casting a spell to go with the arrow. Once the spell was complete, he drew the bow back and fired while the mages and slime exchanged another barrage of spells. This time, the arrow was hidden within the icy wind, and appeared to cut through the flame that the slime launched. Unlike the spells of the mages, the arrow accurately dug into the center mass of the monster, causing a portion of its red body to turn blue. For the first time during the fight, the health bar of the slime appeared above its head, instantly dropping by a third. However, now that it had been injured, the slime was not able to keep its bipedal form. A brief cry seemed to sound out from it as it collapsed into a giant puddle, which turned into a wave that launched at us. Okay, now this we can deal with. Jaren laughed, and the two of them once more launched their spells. However, this time the result was vastly different. Without the slime's own fire spell acting as a shield, and with the archer's second arrow launched, the 3 attacks immediately depleted the remainder of its health. With the slime's death, the goop that made up its body splashed onto the floor, slowly spreading out along the ground. Unlike the slimes from the previous room, this one had a core the size of a fist, yet nobody was in a hurry to retrieve it. How much you want to bet its slime still burns? Jaren asked, looking towards the other mage, who shrugged his shoulders. There wasn't another door at the other side of the room this time, but there was a small pedestal which rose up out of the ground after the slime was defeated. The top of the pedestal rotated, revealing another treasure chest, this one lined with silver. But again, nobody was making a move for it, because the floor was practically lava. Wait till the clerics get here, and let them deal with the floor. Kelly asked, cracking her neck from side to side. That seemed to get the approval from everyone else, so we simply sat back and waited, the mana barrier reduced to only a few inches high from the ground to block the flood. Chapter 139. The Crawl of the Dungeon. Once the clerics arrived, we moved back to the side to allow them through. They took one look at the molten floor ahead of us and nodded with a small smile. Sisters, guide our hands. They prayed together, extending their hands forward. The 3 clerics were all beautiful women, one each from the Felon, Kitsune, and Lycan races. A small golden light surged up from the floor, forming a thin path that led towards the pedestal at the far side of the room. I could tell that the clerics were giving it their all to maintain the bridge, so Nox hurried across it, ignoring the heat of the room. Rather than inspecting its contents one by one like before, he simply made sure that the pedestal itself wasn't trapped, and then grabbed the entire chest to run back to us. Once he was back, we hurried towards the previous room, finally dropping the barrier that had kept the slime goop out of the hall. With the door shut securely behind us, we were able to breathe a long sigh of relief. Honestly, the room was hot, but it didn't feel as hot as I would have expected, given the enclosed space and all the fire that was being thrown around. Figured it'd be like being trapped in an oven, but instead it was just making me work up a moderate sweat. Perhaps it was the result of my stats, or simply because the dungeon was self-regulating the heat to make the room more hospitable. Well, let's see what we got. Nox said with a grin, rubbing his hands together excitedly. He briefly checked to make sure that it wasn't trapped, before carefully opening the lid. This time, he seemed a bit confused by what he pulled out. Shirt, bow, and a crystal orb. He asked curiously, setting each item off to the side. It was the orb that seemed to give him the greatest confusion, and it was understandable why. Rather than crystal, It was made of glass, and had no extraordinary properties. Did it give us a piece of useless junk? Kelly asked, glancing over the orb. Maybe it's a component for a puzzle somewhere else in the dungeon. Jiren suggested, causing the others to look at her. I've heard of some dungeons having simple puzzles, like gathering items from bosses to unlock a room. Maybe this is that. I gave a small nod as I heard that, silently agreeing with her. Without waiting to be prompted, I walked over and identified the other two items. The shirt held the same style as the pants, so it was no surprise when it also had the same effect. The bow, on the other hand, had a much longer string of characters along its limb. It was a longbow as well, so that only gave it more room for the writing. Condenses key into arrows. That description drew my interest, and I couldn't help but pick up the bow to try it out. I had yet to see an enchantment that affected key, only items forged with built-in key pathways. And as I studied the bow, I found that this was also of the latter type. Once I fed a small bit of key into the bow, I could feel a complex series of veins throughout it, guiding the key. Putting my hand on the string, I found that it also had a single vein running through it. And when I put some key into both of them, a thin yellow arrow began to take shape, running between my two hands. Interesting, I mumbled out, drawing the attention of the others. Turning towards them, I looked towards the archer, the monk, and Kelly. This bow creates arrows by condensing ki. Likely, there wasn't a smith who could properly create an item like this, aside from a dungeon, or obviously Tubrok, who was likely the one that created the original this dungeon copied. Though, having the finished product to study would certainly make it easier. Can I try it out? The archer, Nile, asked. Shrugging my shoulders, I tossed the bow over towards him. He caught it deftly in one hand, quickly pulling the string back fully. A yellow shaft of energy formed from the bowstring to the grip, and when he released the string it shot off like a proper arrow. Although it shattered when it hit the distant wall, the sound of the impact let us know that it still carried considerable force. Nile nodded his head with a smile, turning to look at the rest of the group. Does anyone object if I claim this one, at least until we get out of here? Seeing as he was the only archer our group had, it wasn't surprising that nobody raised an objection. Especially since archers like him had a critical weakness when it came to the number of arrows that they could carry. After this, we went to the wind room, where we encountered, you guessed it, flying slimes. They were just floating around, swimming through the air as if it were water. Some of them appeared little more than large bubbles, while others were bouncing back and forth along the walls. Once again, there was an elemental key slime mixed in with the group. While Nile was having fun shooting off a seemingly endless stream of key arrows to handle the clearing of this room, a nearly invisible mass crashed into his side, sending him flying back to the wall. This was the first bit of actual damage that we had taken, but it didn't seem like it hurt all that much. Nile's health bar appeared above his head, but only a sliver of damage had been taken. No doubt, the knockback was more powerful than the damage itself. Of course, it also made the others pay more attention to the surroundings, because the wind key slime was practically invisible. Rather than deal with the slime through carefully looking for it, our two mages decided that it'd be better to just bombard the room with wide area spells. Not the smartest tactic, but it did work. Soon enough, the red health bar appeared floating through the air. Although it was also mostly transparent, it stood out considerably more than the slime itself, making it an easy target to aim at. Once this room was clear, we gathered the loot and continued on. The next room, as I had guessed, held a king wind slime. Unlike the fire one, however, this one was far smaller. When it moved, we could barely keep track of it, forcing Kelly and our other monk to fight it in melee. Between the two of them together, it was still not really a threat, however. Next came the earth room, where slimes rested on the ground like large boulders. This room was perhaps the easiest out of all of them, because the earth slimes were too slow to react. Their defenses were strong, but Kelly just walked around and punched each one once before we were done. The king earth slime, however, was a bit trickier. Not because it was particularly powerful, but because it caught us off guard. When we entered the room, it appeared to be empty. Only once we stepped inside did we feel something was off. Maybe it was because the floor was trying to eat us. Probably a pretty solid clue. Once the floor began to wrap around our legs, all of our melee combatants simply began to punch the floor with all their strength, which was likely overkill. The water room actually had a deep pool in it that we had to swim through. This proved rather unfortunate for most of our group, because they sank like a stone the moment they entered the water. Concealed beneath the surface were dozens of water slimes, each one blending almost perfectly with the water around them. This room actually proved rather annoying, both because of the people who kept sinking and because of the sudden attacks that we faced from every direction. In the end, this was my turn to shine. Most of our group was stuck at the bottom of the pool, trying in vain to punch the water, not able to see what they should be hitting. Every now and then, they jumped up to get a breath of air, but it was obvious that they weren't actually making any progress. Likewise, our mages weren't of much help, as the only thing that they could use to fight the slimes was lighting. However, simply being in the water seemed to cause the slimes to recover quickly, so their spells couldn't show the proper effect. Seeing that we were getting nowhere, and taking our sweet time about it, Leowin manifested the tide. There was a sudden rush as the water rapidly spun around the room, surprising the combatants trying to fight within it. Then, just as suddenly, the water all lifted up towards the ceiling, leaving a series of utterly confused slimes sitting on the damp floor. Jiren looked at me in surprise, clearly wanting to say something, when she saw the glowing silver gauntlets that had appeared in my fists again. Kelly, for her credit, simply grinned as she looked towards the confused slime, cracking her knuckles. Payback time. Needless to say, the water slimes weren't a problem after that. As for the Water King slime, as soon as we rounded the corner to face the room, a certain pair of annoyed wizards filled the entire corridor with lightning. I don't think I ever even got to see what the boss looked like. Is this the last one? Jiren asked, glancing at the blue orb that was contained in the chest of the King Water Slime's room. Unlike the other King rooms, there was another feature on the far wall of this one. 4 colored sockets set into the wall, one each of red, yellow, blue, and white. Thankfully, they were clearly marked, so we could slot them in right where they were each meant to go. And once we did so, there was a low rumbling from the wall, which made me begin to wonder, what's to stop people from just using brute force to punch their way through? Ooh, I know this one. Orivy chimed in, as if fighting to be the first to answer. You see, the corridor behind the door actually doesn't exist at first. The dungeon keeps the next room completely separate from the dungeon, and then moves it in place once the puzzle is solved, as well as creating the hallway. So even when people just keep punching away at the wall, they can't find the room faster than the dungeon can repair it. Ah, well, that's actually kind of clever. I had expected that they reinforced the walls in some way to discourage people from trying, but to do it like that makes sense too. A few moments later, the wall we were standing in front of began to sink into the ground, revealing a short corridor beyond. At the end of it was a large, glittering golden chest. A total of 4 feet high, and 8 across, it was by far the biggest chest I had seen. And before anyone asks, it wasn't a mimic, I checked. In fact, there wasn't a monster in the room at all, which was disappointing. I had expected some kind of super powerful slime. Well, sorry, Orivy humphed into my mind. I'm still trying to figure out how to create a slime stronger than the king's, so this is just a treasure room right now. Naturally, I wasn't the only one suspicious of the chest, as Nox double-checked and even triple-checked to make sure that there did not appear to be any traps. And even then, he asked Nile to open it from a distance, using a key arrow to knock the lid open. Inside was a small, leather bag. Now, to me, I knew exactly what this was. But nobody else did. Seriously. Jiren shouted out, stamping one foot on the ground. All that build up, just for a common little bag. No. Nox shook his head. The bag has magic on it, too. This immediately caught the mage's attention, and Jiren's head snapped to look at the bag. But, what kind of magic would you even put on a bag? She asked, reaching in to pick it up. Wait, I think there's something inside of it. As she was reaching her hand towards the bag to pull out whatever strange artifact was inside, the bag began to glow slightly. Jiren let out a yelp and dropped the small bag to the ground, just as several items likewise clattered to the ground around her feet. Among them was a large staff, a broadsword, and a glass vial, which shattered and spilled its contents onto the ground. Ah, that was a really nice healing potion made from a key slime. Orivy pouted. Guess I'll have to keep it separate next time so they don't break it. Did you all see that? Jiren stuttered in disbelief, looking down at the items that had appeared out of nowhere. The bag. It summoned those items. The other mage's eyes began to practically shine as he realized the potential implications of that. Chapter 140. Splitting the spoils. The journey to the surface was an easy one, as the entire dungeon was just a single floor. According to Jiren, who couldn't stop talking the entire way. This was rather unusual for dungeons. Most dungeons that she had seen had wide expanses of caves and stairs that led through multiple floors. Of course, she had never seen a dungeon with the types of slimes that this one hosted either, or the type of loot. When we once again exited the door at the top of the stairs to rejoin the crew, there was a fierce battle taking place outside. Apparently, during our dungeon jaunt, another monster had appeared in the outside world. This one was a giant serpent, similar to an oversized sea prince. However, to call it giant was an understatement. It looked big enough to swallow up the entire fleet. Its large, blue body glistened in the light, white fins rising up intermittently along its back. Atop its head was a crown of 3 blue spikes, while 2 long whiskers extended from the side of its face. On the sides of its face were large fins, made to almost look like the flippers of a smaller fish, while its underbelly was a pale yellow. Surprisingly enough, it did not seem interested in attacking the ships, instead lifting its head up near the shore of the dungeon's island and shooting out jets of high-pressure water. Each attack knocked 1 or 2 people back, forcing them to slide along the surface. Yet, while I could see that everyone had been damaged by these tactics, none of them had been fatally wounded. On our end, people were firing arrows and spells, the melee combatants staying back to protect the others in case it came on shore. Seeing this, I couldn't help but sigh, shaking my head. In English, I spoke while glancing back towards the door. You can have it go away now. If this were truly a wild monster as it appeared, the fleet would be in ruins. Or at the very least, someone would have been killed. If we had all been out here, and all able to use our full power, we could have likely killed it, though not without suffering some losses. But in the current situation, it simply made no sense that nobody had been killed, unless this was the dungeon merely keeping them busy while we explored. And sure enough, a few moments after I spoke, the giant sea monster sank beneath the surface one more time. A dark shadow could be seen swimming away as it left, leaving behind a rather stunned group of pirates. What? A tired voice spoke up from the mass of people, making it hard to determine who had talked. We're back, I called out, drawing the attention of those nearest us. And we bring loot. And then the attention of everyone else. Jiren was bouncing on her heels excitedly as she clutched the bag in her hands, having refused to let it go the entire way up. She kept mumbling about how this could reshape the world as we know it, her eyes almost glossed over from the excitement. What's got the girl so excited? The Ursa captain asked with a raised eyebrow as he walked closer, his body drenched in seawater. Above his head, his health bar showed that he had barely taken 1/10 of his health as damage, meaning he was probably hit once or twice by the monster's blasts. It's a magic storage bag. Jiren answered before any of the rest of us could. Watch. Before anyone could ask what she was talking about, she had already begun to focus. The small bag in her hand glowed briefly, before a long staff appeared in the air in front of her, which she reached out to grab with her other hand before it could fall to the ground. It has a diameter almost as big as you are, and you can send or retrieve things from it with a thought. In order to test the diameter, Jiren had rather insisted on Nox going inside the bag himself to take a look. The sight of the poor boy looking at the bag and wondering how he was going to fit was priceless. As if to prove her point, she began summoning items from the bag one by one. 4 pairs of pants, 4 shirts, the staff, 2 bows, a tower shield, 2 small shields, and a small pile of scrolls appeared along the wet floor in front of Jiren. Naturally, this drew a startled gasp from the people who had not been directly involved in the dungeon exploration. Especially once they saw that quest scrolls had been pulled out as well. Well, what's the rest of the stuff? Amana asked, gulping as she looked at the pile of loot. Out here, magical items had more value than any currency, so as someone who was groomed to act like a cliché pirate, her excitement was understandable. Tiber, would you mind taking over from here? Jiren turned to ask me with a grin, so I sighed and nodded my head. The clothes come in 4 sets. Each one resists damage of a particular element, be it earth, wind, fire, or water. The staff is a natural energy amplifier, which allows a druid to expand their range of control. Among the bows, one creates arrows from ki, while the others wraps arrows fired from it in bolts of lightning. As I described each item, I pointed to them one by one. The tower shield has an enchantment to increase its defense at the expense of added weight, powered by mana. The other 2 shields create barriers around the user through ki. Finally, I got to the scrolls. These are items which were either sharp or fragile, such as swords, arrows, spears, and a pair of glasses. A pair of what now? Amana spoke up in surprise as she looked towards the scroll I had pointed out last. Glasses. Items worn over the eyes to help your vision. These are made to allow one to read the classes and levels of other beings. Of course, it wasn't quite so simple as that. Having tried them myself, I knew that it wasn't as precise as telling you exactly what classes people had, or their levels in them. Instead, there was an aura generated around each person you saw through them, with various patches of the aura representing different classes. For instance, when I looked at Jiren through the glasses, I saw most of her body covered in an aura that appeared to be made of overlapping spell circles. Along the aura were patches that looked to flutter as if the pages of a book. And when I looked at Nox, I saw a darker aura of daggers and footprints. Of course, each of the items that the dungeon had given us were powerful, but the two which could revolutionize beastkin culture were naturally the bag of holding and the class glasses. The other items, while incredibly useful, were merely at the level of being powerful magic items. Though naturally, I went through and explained the properties of each item in turn. So, how should we divide the spoils, then? The Ursa captain asked with an amused smile, crossing her arms in front of himself. There's not enough for everyone. Amana pointed out, shaking her head regrettably. So not everyone can take something. For this, let's do it this way. Everyone from the dungeon group will get the option to select one item from the loot as their personal spoils. However, as soon as she said that, she turned her head sharply to look at Jiren. Not including the bag and glasses. Those will be under lock and key with me, to make sure that nothing can happen to it before we hit shore. But, Jiren looked down longingly at the bag still in her hands, as if she couldn't bear to part with it. Her eyes almost misted up, as if she was going to break down and cry from having the treasure taken from her. No buts, lass. Amana sighed, shaking her head. You know well as I how precious those items are, so we can't be risking anything happening to them. The safest place in the fleet be the Jolly Dodger, so that's where they'll be staying till we hit shore. After that, I can agree to let you and the others study it, see if you can figure out how to make more. Agreed. Jiren nodded her head sadly, extending the bag slowly for Amana to take. Though, it seemed like she wasn't entirely convinced, as Amana had to have a brief tug of war with her to pry the bag out of her hands, her body simply refusing to let it go. In the end, I was the first to choose as the team leader. Naturally, I chose the natural energy amplifying staff. While it wasn't all that important to me as a keeper, it was a priceless treasure to Tiber as a druid. At the level limit, any small improvement was hard to come by, so an artifact that boosted the range of a druid's abilities was amazing. Aside from myself, Kelly chose to take the smaller copper shield, strapping it to her arm with a small grin. Once everyone had either picked an item, or decided that nothing from the loot suited them, the rest went to the captains to distribute. Out of all of it, the only items that didn't find a proper owner were the clothes, because one size did not fit all. Or Ivy, is it just me, or are those clothes sized to fit my human body? I couldn't help but ask as I watched the captains passing the clothes around to see if they fit anyone properly. Well, maybe. I had to pick someone to size them for. And being the goddess of love doesn't give me intimate knowledge of people's measurements, well, not those measurements at least. I had the distinct feeling that I just heard something I shouldn't have, and promptly decided to ignore it. Ultimately, although there were people who could fit in the clothes, they all chose not to wear them because they could only fit in one piece, or because the clothes ended up too baggy for the smaller people. In the end, the clothes were put with the bag and glasses inside a chest in Amana's cabin. With that settled, we made a note of the location to hopefully return later, and once again set off. As we exited the dungeon's sphere of influence, I infused mana into the staff I had acquired to activate it, testing out how far the amplified range of my own influence was. Unsurprisingly, it burned mana quite rapidly, but the results were equally powerful. With the boost of the staff, as well as my token of nature, I found that my influence finally spread all the way to the horizon. While that may not seem like much, given my past memories of the world, that was entirely different here. After all, the horizon distance at sea wasn't 5 kilometers like in the past world, but 20. This meant that I was able to influence a full 20 kilometers worth of natural energy. Of course, this wouldn't hold up for long. Given my relatively low mana pool, I began to feel a headache from the energy drain after holding it for roughly a minute. And with my mana low enough to cause a headache, that likewise meant that my normal manipulation of natural energy was less powerful. Still, if I were to use this staff while I was at full power, the sheer distance would be enough to grant the illusion of Tiber being able to control the world. Of course, that was only just an illusion, but still it brought a smile to my lips. Part of me was curious if the range would further increase if I unleashed my full power, and I decided that I'd have to give that a test once I was done with this mission. Chapter 141. Homesick. After leaving the dungeon, our journey continued with little real change. Naturally, we weren't going to come across another dungeon or anything like that. In fact, we went a full 3 months without even seeing another island, which is when things started to turn sour aboard the ship. By now, we had been at sea for half of a year. The warmth of spring had faded, and a chill was starting to seep into our bones. It wasn't as bad for us near the equator, but it was easy to tell that winter was approaching. A cold winter at sea, where nothing could come to our aid. It was also here that I was able to observe a rather peculiar characteristic of the Ursa. Once the cold began to set in, the lower level Ursa began to show signs of tiredness throughout the day. It wasn't an issue for Kelly, as her fire key kept her constantly warm, but others weren't so lucky. Another key problem was that we were slowly running out of the preserved food that we had packed. This seemed to be a disadvantage to being higher level, as it meant that people with more powerful bodies also needed to eat more. To the previous example, Kelly often ate at least 30 pounds of food a day. Even I had to eat a considerable amount more than I was used to, though not to the same degree. Naturally, we fished for extra food, and harvested what we could from monsters, but the scarcity of monsters on the open seas made it hard to find something large enough to properly feed the crews. Every day, there would be people rushing over from the other ships to get food, as their own stores had run out. As the center ship, the Jolly Dodger had the most supplies, so it was one of our duties to share it with them. Yet, our food stores likewise had a limit that was fast approaching. As I sat on the bench, using natural energy to keep myself warm, I could hear the conversations of the crew behind me. I don't know that we'll have enough food to last out the week. We can't turn back, we'd never make it to land. What do you suggest? Without food, we won't make it anywhere. What if we kept what we have left? Better one ship survives than none, right? No sooner had those words left the mouth of an aged lichen man than a low growl spread throughout the ship. Glancing back, I saw Amana, her hair standing on edge as she stared daggers at the one who had spoken. I'll not be having any talk of treachery on my ship. If I hear another word of it come out of your mouth, we'll be seeing if you make better bait. Am I clear? The lichen knew that he could probably overpower Amana in a fight, but as he glanced around he realized that there were more people against him than there were who agreed. Albeit reluctantly, he chose to back down. Just as I was beginning to call the heavens above for aid, a certain princess happily hummed as she hopped her way out from below deck. Captain Tilda. She turned to look at Amana with a bright smile. I know where we can find food. As soon as the words left her mouth, all eyes immediately turned to focus on her. Amana had an amused smile on her face as she leaned forward against the wheel of the ship. Well, don't keep us in suspense, lass. Do be telling us where we can eat our fill. There are islands nearby, Disney said calmly, her posture relaxed. 3 days directly west of here. 2 if we hurry. I've been praying, and Goddess Terra assured me that there is enough food for everyone on the island. Not enough for us to settle there, but enough to fill our stomachs for the rest of the voyage. Did she now? Amana raised a curious brow. Ye know I won't tolerate any falsehoods with something like this, so are ye sure that's what she said? Disney nodded her head strongly. I'm sure. On my pride as her princess, I would not falsify the words of Terra. Good enough for me. Amana tilted her head back and laughed. All ships, we make west. Our dear princess received word from Terra herself. 3 days to land, and enough food to fill our hulls to bursting. There was an immediate shift in the wind after her words, turning us towards the west. I couldn't help but glance up towards the sky as I thought inwardly. Did you really have that conversation with her? Yeah, Terra replied with a low groan. She's been pestering me about where to get food for a couple weeks now. Not just her, but most of the crew have. They hope that I will guide their fates. Originally, the plan was to make you all sweat a bit more, and in another 2 weeks you'd hit a large island to resupply. You'd have just barely enough food to make it there, but you wouldn't be in any danger. Is this detour going to extend our trip? To my question, there was a slight sigh. Not by much, just a week or so. Why, are you getting homesick? Even though she asked that playfully, I immediately answered honestly. A bit. Oh. Her tone became more serious when she realized that she had hit the mark. You can come back for a little while, Dale. Honestly, We're all surprised that you managed to make it this long without returning. The longest bet anyone was willing to place on you was 4 months. I felt a slight chuckle rise in my throat as I heard that. How long did you bet? I wasn't surprised that they had made these kinds of bets. This was dozens of times longer than I had ever stayed on the surface, and it had taken everything to stay down here this long. I'll admit that it was kind of fun to play Tiber, but I also missed being home as well. 2 weeks. Tara didn't even hesitate to answer, before her tone turned a bit softer. Come on back, Dale. You can let your host take over for a few days while you rest. Bihana's already set to take over guiding the ships whenever you want to take a break. I nodded my head, a small smile playing on my lips as I heard the concern in her tone. Okay, but make sure that my host doesn't do anything unusual while I'm relaxing. If he does, you all have full permission to hit the global stop button. I made sure that message went out to all the girls watching over the voyage, just in case Tara decided that something was more amusing than unusual. I could faintly hear a laugh as I focused, choosing to return to the admin room for the first time in around 6 months. The first thing I noticed was that I felt far more clean than I had been as Tiber, as well as how I could move more easily. The second thing I felt was a pair of bodies pressing against me, one on either side. Once I opened my eyes, I saw Tara and Ryan, both leaning against me and smiling slightly. My idea. Ryan immediately spoke up once I opened my eyes. Thought you might like to get some proper relaxation in the arms of your goddesses, Tilda. Tara rolled her eyes at that. You just wanted him to fuck you again now that he was back, don't try to hide it. Though she said that, a small knowing smirk was on her face, which caused Ryan to laugh. Maybe, but all in due time. She admitted, before tugging on my arms gently. First, let's go sit down, I nodded my head, letting the two girls lead me towards the living room. To my surprise, I actually saw Ashley and Orivy already there, sitting on a recliner. Well, to be more precise, Ashley was sitting on the recliner, and Orivy was in her lap. Not surprisingly, they were watching an anime that I could faintly recognize from Earth. Hey, Ash, I called out, drawing the demon goddess's attention to me. How's the keeper life treating you? At that, Ashley simply groaned. 120,000 years. 3 ice ages, 2 supervolcanoes, and a near-extinction plague. I didn't exactly sign up for that. Dale, I don't know how you handle it. I blinked slightly as she briefly gave her summary of her experiences. I don't even think I've hit 10,000 years on my world. You also have nearly a dozen beautiful goddesses who actively work to prevent total planetary collapse. Ryan pointed out, guiding me to the couch, though that brought a laugh from Ashley. Right. Anyways, they should be all set for your plan whenever you're ready. She smiled, shaking her head. They're not quite at the modern age yet, but they've definitely made steps in the right direction. And they look really cool, too. Orivy grinned, pulling her attention away from the TV for the first time since we entered. Really, bro, I've been working with Sis Udona to make some movies for you to watch about them. They don't have any magic or anything like our people do, but they still end up being really interesting. I smiled towards Orivy, nodding my head. I'll have to check those out soon. I don't think my end will be ready for a while. Not until the races all have at least met each other. Though, at this rate I don't see it taking too long, once I start fast forwarding again. Seeing Orivy nod her head excitedly, Ashley giggled to herself, wrapping her arms around the halfling's waist. Tara said you had a plan, so I didn't want to bring my world too far ahead. These last few months, I've been getting to know the others, and playing with them. They're really good people, Dale. I have to say, if I was going to spend an eternity anywhere, I'd rather spend it with them. While she spoke, a soft smile was on her face. Ashley had never been an unpopular woman. She was always beautiful, which naturally led to her being surrounded by others. Though, the people she was surrounded by weren't always the best. Maybe now, she was starting to feel more at home here than she had before. Did you ever get the chance to master flying? I asked curiously, noticing how she had tucked her wings in so that they wouldn't get in the way of her sitting posture. That drew another groan from Ashley, though she nodded her head. It took me around 50 years of my world's time practicing to get the hang of it. Tara found me a volcano where I could descend without using any of my energy, and had me practice there until I could properly control my body. She sent a grateful smile to Tara next to me after saying that, to which the catgirl just purred a silent response. And you're not getting bored up here? At that question, Ashley just shook her head. Nope. Why would I? Aside from playing with the others, there's still so much that I can do. Just playing around with the admin room itself can be pretty interesting. If you get some free time, you should check out Udona's room. The two of us did some remodeling on it. She grinned playfully as she said that, drawing a small snicker from Orivy, who no doubt knew what she was talking about. Well, I'll probably be up here for a couple days, so I can do that. With that, I decided to stop interrupting their show, wrapping one arm around Ryan and Tara each, pulling the two of them against me. Of course, that lasted for just a moment before I found another form pressing against the other side of Ryan, Leo Win happily leaning against her mother. It's good to be back for a bit. Chapter 142. I Dream of Demons. After Ashley and Orivy were done with their show, we all decided to watch one of the movies that they had made about the demon race. Excited, Orivy jumped up and ran over to a set of shelves near the TV. Okay. Let's start with an introduction. She grabbed the first in a row of DVDs and inserted it into the player below the TV. Once the movie started, the scene was of Ashley and Orivy standing atop a rocky mountain, looking towards the camera. Welcome to Demons 101. Orivy excitedly said in the movie, as the actual halfling goddess hopped back over into Ashley's lap on the chair. Here we'll go over all the basic information you need to know before watching any of the other movies. Other movies? Ashley asked, obviously faking her shock as she looked down to Orivy. That's right. We're going to make an entire series to chronicle the history of the demons in an easy-to-understand format. I call it, I Dream of Demon. When Orivy announced that, the name appeared in golden words above her head, causing Ashley's eyes to twitch briefly. You're not that good at naming things, are you? She deadpanned, causing Orivy to suddenly fall down against the rocky mountain. Hey, stick to the script. Anyways, let's start where every great story starts, the beginning. And by that, I mean the beginning. Back when Desbar was young, and the bats were just crawling out of their caves. Wait. Ashley interrupted, waving her hands in front of her. Bats. I thought this was about demons. I'm getting there. The little goddess groaned, though a small smile could be seen on her face. Though, I guess I can skip some parts. Anyways, the demon race is a descendant of these giant bats. Unlike humans, who evolved from apes, demons evolved from giant red bats. Again, Ashley seemed to look on in shock as one of said giant bats appeared behind Orivy. It was bigger than either of the goddesses, its bulky red body a terrifying sight to behold, two large curved horns decorating the top of its head. You're saying my people evolved from that? Orivy glanced behind her with a grin, and nodded. That's right. Because of this, demons are a naturally nocturnal race. Although their hearing is not as sensitive as a bat's anymore, their eyesight has adapted to allow them to see in the dark. Their eyes are actually so sensitive that direct exposure to sunlight can temporarily blind them, which led to them living in caves for several thousand years. Ashley seemed to shudder at that. At least they got over that bit, right? Orivy coughed awkwardly, glancing away from the red-skinned goddess. Well, not really. On Earth, the most terrifying beasts live in the sky and sea. But on Desbar, the greatest predator lives on the ground. While she spoke, the screen seemed to shake slightly, the camera panning away from them to observe the base of the mountain. Roaming around in a large herd was another great beast. This one appeared to be a scorpion, the size of a truck, with 3 black tails. These scorpion-like beasts, labeled the Chiron, meaning black hunter, are the apex predators of the land. They are absolutely brutal to anything not of their own species, but travel in packs of no less than 5 members at a time. However, their dense carapace and large size has made it so that they are not as good of climbers as their smaller counterparts, their bodies slipping and falling off of steep inclines. Ashley breathed out a sigh of relief as she heard that, the camera panning back to them. So, my people are safe in the mountains, then. Relatively. Orivy nodded her head. There are still predators for the demons to worry about, but none as bad as the Chiron. But let's look past that. Back to the demons themselves. The camera faded to black, before another scene appeared. This one was of a rocky outcropping inside a dark cave. Inside the outcropping was a pair of pitch-black eggs, being watched over by a red-skinned woman with loving eyes. With a hushed tone, Orivy spoke to the camera. You see, unlike most mammals, the demons fall in the egg-laying category. This makes it so that females can still fly about while waiting for their young to hatch, without the weight of the pregnancy keeping them grounded. Ashley's eyes seemed to soften as she looked at the mother and her 2 eggs. Seeing that, Orivy smiled and explained. It normally takes about 2.5 months for the eggs to hatch once laid, during which time either the father or mother stay with the eggs to protect them. Oh, right. Desbar's year is a bit different from Earth. Rather than a 365-day calendar, their years last for 390 days. Thankfully, the length of a day is still similar to Earth. Anyways, once an egg hatches, the imps are born. Imps are the demon's name for their young, like baby for human or kitten for cats. You can blame Ashley for that one. Or Ivy grinned, slightly, and I could swear that the real Ashley's cheeks darkened for just a moment at that. Now, anything else about their biology we need to discuss? It's rare to see an overweight demon, because their wings can only carry them for flight if they are light enough. What else? Oh, their tails. Or Ivy grinned mischievously, reaching out and grabbing Ashley's tail, causing the red-skinned woman to yelp. A demon's tail is highly sensitive, allowing them to detect little changes in wind currents during flight. This also allows them to use it to rub against objects to get a feel for what they look like when they can't use their eyes. At the same time, the tails of a demon are strong, roughly as strong as their own arms, depending on how much they work them out. I think that's enough of the biology lesson, don't you? Ashley asked, snatching back her tail and glaring at Orivy, causing the halfling goddess to laugh. Fine, fine, let's move on to their history, then. She replied, to which Ashley nodded. Now, there have been several extinction-level events that have occurred throughout Desbar's history, each of which brought the race to the brink of collapse. From here, Ashley seemed to take over, glancing towards the camera. The first was a supervolcano that erupted, only 1,000 years after the world had entered my hands. Sadly, this volcano was located on the largest and most populated continent, and there were no survivors there. The ash cloud spread throughout the entire world, and it looked like all hope would be lost for them. Thankfully, demons were a cave-dwelling people to begin with. Orivy chimed in, to which Ashley nodded with a smile. That's right. This let a large number of the demons from other continents survive the catastrophe, even as the volcano practically destroyed the one it was on. Roughly 5,000 years after that was the first ice age. Just as the demons were starting to break past the Stone Age for the first time, the climate shift forced them back into their caves, with many more dying. Ashley's face was sad as she spoke, her eyes seeming to mist up. Only 80,000 demons survived the Ice Age, scattered all throughout the world. But this was only the first one. Each time they began to advance, catastrophe struck. When they had created great cities atop the mountains, and advanced into the Age of Steel, there was another supervolcano eruption. This one was directly followed by another Ice Age, killing all but 60,000. Finally, there was one last Ice Age. This one was just a mere 10,000 years ago, and lasted for over 8,000 years. But this time, the demons persisted. Whether it was luck or planning, this time the Ice Age did not claim many lives. Though their progress was halted in the Bronze Age, they were able to keep their cave dwellings warm. Well, it's not like the Ice Ages were all bad. Orivy smiled up towards Ashley. That last one wiped out the last of the Chiron, you know. Ashley couldn't help but laugh at that, nodding. That's right. For the first time in their history, the demons were able to walk the land without fear. This brought about their greatest period of advancement, roughly 1,500 years ago. The camera once again faded to black, turning to a view of a wide valley. In the valley was a sprawling city. Each building had a half-dome cover, one end open to receive flying demons. After the last Ice Age ended, the demons of every continent spread out into the world. Though their cultures were different, it was then that they became the true masters of Desbar. Over the course of the last 1,500 years, they have expanded past their own borders, establishing trade routes and treaties, fought wars and brokered peace. Now, where they have left off now, they are just beginning to step into the information age. As she finished her speech, Ashley gave a deep bow, and the screen faded to black once more. Just as I thought the movie was over, Orivy's voice appeared from the TV. Stay tuned for the next installment of I Dream of Demon, where we look into some more specific historical moments of the demon race. With that, the movie really did end, and I looked over to see Orivy grinning at me from her spot in Ashley's lap. So, what did you think? Well, it was definitely a large info dump. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. But it's interesting to see how they developed like that. Saying that, I looked over towards Ashley. You don't have a problem with bright lights or anything, do you? She tilted her head curiously in response. Oh, you mean because of their sensitivity to light? No, that doesn't apply to me. Well, not unless I want it to. And let's face it, who would actually sign themselves up for something like that? True. I couldn't help but nod my head at that. But you said that they are in the information age, now. Do they have things like the internet or anything like that? Ashley shook her head, a small smile on her lips. Not yet. They've got electricity and television, but they haven't gotten anything that big. That's why I said that they aren't at the modern age yet, they're still missing a few things. But, if I fast forward just a little bit more, then they'll be there. Nodding again, I glanced over towards Tara, Ryan, and Leowin, only to find the three of them having their eyes closed. Either they were bored from the short movie and decided to zone out, or they were tired, or just really enjoying laying against each other on the couch like this. So, what did you have planned next? I think I should be able to watch one more before resting a bit. Hearing that, Orivy squirmed out of Ashley's lap with a wide grin. Oh, I know just the one. You'll love it. As she said that, she rushed over towards the shelves once again. Where did I put it? No, not the Occult Wars. Not the Cave Cities of Abaddon. There it is. She seemed to find what she was looking for, and pulled it off the shelf. The King of Twilight. I don't even know what I can expect from a name like that. Chapter 143. The Birth of Twilight. When the screen turned on once more, we were greeted to the sight of a setting sun over a distant mountain. As the camera zoomed in, we saw a lone figure standing atop the mountain, his large, leathery wings folded behind him as a cape. The figure stared off into the sunset, and as the camera panned around him we were able to see just how he was able to do so. The figure was, of course, a demon male. His form large and robust, his chest bare. Around his neck he wore a simple black cloth, which lifted up into a hood that stopped right before his large, curved horns. The front of the hood connected to a pitch black mask that covered the entirety of the man's face. Upon a close inspection, there were two very thin slits in the mask, each one directly over the eyes. With the camera focused on him, burning letters began to appear on the screen, reading, "The King of Twilight." Soon, a narrator began to speak, and to no surprise I found it to be Ashley's voice. This is a tale of an old and wise king, but at the same time the most brutal conqueror in history. He is the King of Twilight, and this is his story. The flaming letters at the bottom of the screen exploded as her words ended, engulfing the entire screen with a cover of fire. When it cleared, the screen was dark. This story begins as all do. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the beginning, there was nothing but darkness. A tiny world trapping a being of great destiny. And what does a great being do when trapped within a small world? He breaks free. A cracking could be heard from the screen, streaks of thin light filtering in through a shaking form. An infant's cry sounded out, before with one sudden burst, light poured in. Of course, this young boy's greatness isn't quite ready yet. No, he has the most humble of beginnings. An abandoned egg in a dark cave far from town. Nobody to care for him, nobody to love him. Nobody to know whether he lived or died. The cry of the infant soon overwhelmed the narrator, and the camera turned to see a tiny red form, its horns just barely poking through a patch of black hair. Its small fists were curled up, flailing wildly while its tiny wings stretched out around it. By all rights, the boy should have died. Be it the elements, or simple hunger, the world had been just too cruel to him. Yet fate had other plans. As the narrator spoke, the scene flashed forward. The young boy was seen crawling about, his body far thinner than it had been before. His weak hands reached out and picked up a bundle of moss, stuffing it into his mouth before he curled up in a ball. Out of the countless abandoned youths of the world, very few survive long enough to find food of their own. Thankfully, demons are hatched strong. Strong enough to slowly move about. Again the screen flashed, and the boy now appeared to be a couple of years old. His body was so thin you had to wonder if he had ever been fed. In his hands, he held a sharpened stick, and as the camera zoomed out it could be seen that he was sitting atop a high branch in a tree, staring down at the field below. The boy had tried hunting from such a young age, yet his small body had always prevented him from reaching his target. By the end of the day, he was forced to scavenge for moss or edible fruits. Until one day, everything changed. The boy caught sight of a small animal, slowly walking beneath the tree. It appeared to be similar to a six-legged cat with glistening, black skin instead of fur. When he saw it, he flinched, quickly steadying himself on the branch. His hands tightened their grip around his spear, his wings silently extending. Soon, he made his move, jumping from the branch and diving down to his prey below. The cat quickly looked up, and immediately rushed off, out of the way of the coming danger and into the distant trees. Unfortunately, the boy's movement was too reckless, and without his prey to cushion his fall, his wings were too weak to stop in time. Although he attempted to pull up, he still crashed heavily against the ground, a sickening crunch heard as his arm bent the wrong way. Pained, he couldn't help but cry out, screaming as he laid on the ground, unable to move. While the moonlight shone upon him, he sniffled and sobbed, unable to move without sending waves of agony throughout his body. Once more, his fate had apparently been sealed. He was doomed to die alone, without a name, without a single person aware of his existence. And indeed, this was almost the case. Just as Ashley's voice faded, a thick shadow descended upon him, giant wings slowly folding while an aged man landed on the ground. For the first time in the movie, a voice besides Ashley's spoke. "What do we have here?" he asked, slowly approaching the screaming child. He saw the broken arm, the discarded spear, and was able to piece together the child's story. "I see." The camera turned dark as the aged man knelt over the broken child, and the narrator's voice again returned. The boy had been taken in, and given a name. Mayan, the child of the moon. For the first time in his life, he had been fed properly. Mayan had a family. The next scene was, obviously years later, the boy now nearly 10 years of age. Gone was the emaciated look of his early years. Now, he could be seen flying through the skies, properly clothed in brown pants tied with a rope at his waist, his tail free and dangling behind him. His torso was covered by a simple linen shirt with an open back. The camera panned around, and showed him landing atop a building in the middle of a wide field. "Uncle, I'm home," he called out, stepping inside from the door atop the roof. There was a cough as the aged man, not far in his years, stood up from a rickety wooden chair. "My boy, where have you been? Don't you know it's not safe to be outside these nights?" "I'm fine. Nobody saw me. I just wanted to stretch my wings for a bit," Mayan explained with a small smile to the worried old man, who let out a sigh of relief. Again, the narrator spoke up. There were troubled times in the lands. The queen had recently passed away, and the king appeared to have lost his mind. The camera zoomed out, focusing on another house where demons had descended, iron spears in hand. Houses were being ransacked at random. People killed without the slightest provocation simply for asking what they did wrong. The nobles had cried out for mercy, but the king turned a deaf ear. Any who tried to take action were killed, their bodies nailed to the castle wall as an example. As the narrator's voice faded, the scene changed again, but this time it wasn't a skip in time. Instead, it moved to follow a group of 5 demons, all male, as they soared through the night sky. A house could be seen approaching in the distance, surrounded by a vast field. Obviously the house of a farmer, though at a glance it looked to be the same one that Mayan was recently shown flying towards. As they descended, 4 of the 5 split off to surround the house, landing heavily while the 5th landed directly on the roof. With that, the scene again switched to the inside of the house, where the old uncle displayed an expression of immediate panic. "What's wrong?" Mayan asked, moments before a loud crash could be heard on the ceiling. "Quick, quick, the cellar." The uncle spoke in a hushed tone, pushing Mayan along without allowing any time to speak. There were no windows on the bottom floor of the house, so those outside were unable to see as he pushed his straw bed aside and lifted up a pair of floorboards. "The soldiers are here, you have to hide." But what about you, uncle?" he asked, his face quickly showing fear and concern for the only family he had ever known. "I'll be fine, my boy." The old man smiled sadly, shaking his head. His dull eyes closed as he pushed Mayan down into the small cellar, quickly covering it back up. "No matter what, you mustn't make a sound." Just as he moved his bed to once again cover up the entrance to the cellar, there was a crash from the floor above. The camera moved down to the perspective of Mayan, looking out from the cracks of the floorboards. We saw as the old man weakly walked towards the stairs, just in time for the door to be flung open by a bladed boot. Likely knowing the reputation of the army, the uncle kept himself quiet. Stepping through the doorway was a strong man with a bare chest, wearing only a pair of pants and leather boots with a bladed tip at the end. The soldier did not even spare a glance at the old man as he looked around, his eyes scanning the room. "Where's the boy?" he asked in a gruff voice, causing the old man to flinch. "He's out for the night. Went to stretch his wings. Surely the king doesn't care about on little boy." The man spoke up in jest, but soon regretted his words. The soldier's face turned grim, the grip on his spear tightening. In one swift motion, he turned around and plunged the iron tip of the spear into the old man's heart. The hidden boy slapped his hands over his mouth to prevent himself from crying out as the old man's body fell to the floor weakly. Just as the soldier turned to call for the rest of the troops, I clapped my hands to pause the movie. Much to the surprise of the girls next to me, and a certain halfling. Hey, what was that for? Tara groaned, blinking her eyes and sitting up. I thought I might have woken her when she spoke again. It was just getting good. It's pretty easy to guess what's going on, I said, shaking my head and looking towards Orivy and Ashley. Illegitimate child of the queen. The two goddesses exchanged a glance, before looking back at me and nodding their heads. Quest for revenge. Another nod. Think we can skip over the more cliché bits, then? I asked with a small smile, glancing towards the rather stereotypical, father figure killed to spur the hero to action, scene. It might happen in real life, but that only makes it more stereotypical, not less. And besides, they obviously hadn't intended to spend much time building up the people around Mayan, so might as well speed things up. Fine, fine. Orivy rolled her eyes with a small grin. Spoilsport. The movie soon began to fast forward, until the narrator's voice spoke up once again. And so, Mayan learned of his true identity. The abandoned son of the dead queen. When the camera stopped, it was on a grown man with his head lowered as he walked through a busy street, the full moon high in the sky. But now, the news had come too late. The king was already dead, murdered by the eldest son of one of the king's concubines. The grown man, no doubt the fully grown Mayan, sank into the crowd, his form soon becoming indistinguishable from the mass of bodies. And this was the day when the King of Twilight was born, his rage against the kingdom driving him to great and terrible things. Chapter 144. I want to play a game. The next time the camera focused in on a scene, it was surprisingly in the middle of the day, the first real daytime scene that we had seen for the demons. A tall stone building, easily eclipsing all others nearby, with a dark shadow looming over it. The top of the building, like all others, was unguarded. This allowed the figure hidden in the sky to descend, landing softly on the roof near the doorway. When the camera panned around, we were able to see the same black mask he wore in the opening scene, with the tiny slits in front of the eyes. Following some old legends, Mayan learned of a method to deceive the sun. It is hard to adjust the sleep cycle of a demon, so very few have done so in the past, which is ultimately what led to his success. As the narrator spoke, Mayan pulled a small knife from its sheath on his belt, and wedged it next to the door, lifting it up to remove the primitive lock. Inside was a single guard, though he appeared unsteady on his feet. Attached to his left hand was a gauntlet, which extended down several inches before pulling back and extending out to either side, forming a large bow anchor to his arm. The string rested against the back of his leather-clad wrist, but he did not have an arrow nocked. When Mayan pushed through the door, the light shined in on the guard's face, making him cry out in surprise, covering his face with his right hand. At the same time, the dagger in Mayan's hand flew across the room to pierce into the man's throat, silencing him. Mayan's first target was not his father's kingdom, for he knew to target it immediately would be suicide. Instead, he gathered a force through assassination. The scene changed to a demon lying peacefully in a large bed, the room completely dark. Mayan's figure walked softly into the room, moving next to the bed. With a single stroke, he slit the sleeping demon's throat. Then, the scene changed again, once more returning to night time. Now, Mayan was standing in front of several other demons, handing each one a mask. He used his power to pull in others. Those who joined him would fight by his side, and those who did not would fall before his blade. The camera zoomed out, showing a map of the area, lines drawing about to mark the borders of the different territories. One by one they began to darken. Like this, Mayan slowly dominated the nearby kingdoms, pulling each one into his rule. And with every territory, his numbers grew. Soon, the neighboring kingdoms sought to fight him back, gathering their own armies to advance upon him. As a red wave formed near one of the lit territories, moving towards an already darkened one, the camera again zoomed in. But what they found was only scorched earth. As the narrator said, the camera soon found a village, fields burning and smoke rising up into the sky. Bodies were nailed to the walls of nearby buildings on full display, much like the old king had done before. And Mayan's army was never found, for they did not reside in the cities. They lived in the mountains and the jungles, moving from one place to another. Again the scene changed, this time to a set of tents that were spread out over a wide field. Numerous winged shadows slowly descended from above, the masked demons invading the camp. Any force sent after Mayan's army only became a new source of supplies when he led his people to slaughter them. Some tried in vain to create soldiers who could fight beneath the sun to fight back, but few understood the secret of Mayan's masks, leading them ultimately to failure. One last time, the scene changed again, this time to the same mountain we had seen in the opening credits. Finally, Mayan had gathered enough forces. He had trained them all to fight during the day, and was prepared to take flight on his brother's kingdom. As Ashley's voice spoke, hundreds of figures flew up from behind the mountain, their great wings seeming to cover the sky. And like all before, the kingdom was doomed to fall. The camera flashed to another demon nailed to the wall, no doubt Mayan's brother given the context. The Twilight King forged a new empire and waged war across the land, bringing destruction in his wake. Though his kingdom lasted but a single generation, his legacy was remembered forever. A legacy of blood. And with that, the movie slowly faded out, and the credits began rolling. Of course, the only two names that appeared on the credits were Orivy's and Ashley's, over and over. So, what did you think? Orivy suddenly spoke up, wiggling out of Ashley's lap to move in front of me. Seeing her wide grin, I chuckled softly to myself. It was interesting. A bit rushed though, don't you think? I couldn't lie to her and say that it was great. Though, hearing my honest answer made her puff her cheeks out at me. Crossing her arms in front of her chest, she let out a long sigh, closing her eyes. I tried to get Big Sis Udona to help with them, but she's so focused on her incarnations that she hasn't been able to. Orivy brought her hands up to her face, slapping her cheeks while she opened her eyes to look at me, which seemed to startle the three women leaning on the couch. Huh, wah, they babbled slightly as they glanced around, as if forgetting where they were. I had the faintest suspicion that they weren't really faking it this time. Is it over? Tara asked with a yawn, her tail stretching out straight behind her. Yeah. Orivy pouted again, moving to climb into Tara's lap. Still, it served its purpose at least. A short little distraction to give you a look at the demons. If you wanted a better look, you could get it yourself. This is true. I nodded my head, reaching over to pat Orivy on the head, which seemed to make her smile. And I'll probably do that later, after I'm done with what I'm doing down on Earth. Orivy nodded a bit more at that. Good. They're really neat. Not quite like what your people were before, but still kinda similar. Aside from the whole, demon thing. I rolled my eyes when I heard that, smiling towards Orivy. Yeah, I'm sure. Anyways, I should probably go get some rest for a bit. Wanna spend some time playing when I'm done. Orivy's head shot up at that, her eyes wide open as she looked at me, a wide grin on her face. Wait, really? What do you want to play? I glanced over towards Ryan, thinking about that. Well, most games wouldn't really work too well, given our situation. Mind seeing if there are some on the market that we can get? After all, how can you play a game like poker when you can figure out your opponent's hand with a thought, or a dice game when it always lands on what you want? Ryan nodded her head at the request, leaning over and planting a soft kiss on my lips. Sure. You go relax, and I'll make a shopping list. Her smile was obviously teasing, but it only made me laugh more as I stood up, shaking my head. Getting up, I made my way back to the bedroom, and soon lost myself in the soft feeling of my bed. After sleeping on what was basically a bench with a blanket for 6 months, a real bed felt fantastic. Enough that I wasn't even feeling like getting frisky with the catgirl that climbed in behind me, instead just pulling Tara into my arms and holding her while I closed my eyes, feeling her arms gently wrap around me as well. The next day, when I woke up, I had decided to just relax in the bed for a while. That was, until Orivy ran in to wake me up so that we could play. As it turned out, the system truly did have a system in place for keepers to play games without the fear of cheating. In fact, there was a cheap package for it, costing only 20 points in total. Keeper Entertainment Package. Warning: this package has no effect on anything outside of the administration room. Items created through this package's effects cannot be taken out of the administration room through any purposes. This package offers a new function to the administration room, whereby keepers and companions can design various forms of games to be played in the administration room. These games can involve anything from randomized devices, live combat, to system appraisal. Settings may be enabled to restrict the abilities of the players, allowing a wider array of game types. 20 points. Naturally, I bought the package as soon as Ryan pointed it out to me. With my current balance, 20 points was just a drop in a very big bucket, and this would keep myself and the others entertained. All in all, completely worth it. Besides, if they manage to create an interesting game, maybe they will even be able to teach it to their cultures. Unsurprisingly, Udona rushed in as soon as I made the purchase. What was that? She asked, her eyes more awake than I had seen them ever since the other Beastkin goddesses had been given their personalities. You just bought something, and my entertainment domain picked it up right away. Wait. That can happen. I blinked in surprise, still sitting up on my bed. Next to me, Orivy was happily bouncing. He got us some games to play. She shouted happily, waving her arms like the child she appeared to be. Real games, that we can design and play among ourselves. No worrying about cheating or anything else. Udona's face showed the widest smile I had ever seen on her at that moment as she understood. After a moment of focusing, she nodded her head repeatedly. It looks like it comes with several games pre-loaded, as well as templates to design new games. Combat. Bihana and Kelliope will love this, there's even a treasure hunt. Oh, this is great. Huh. Seeing how excited the two of them were over this, I had a different line of thought. So this is how Grimmer's Guild handles the monthly meetings. They just use this system, and pay for the prizes out of their own pocket. Glancing over at them, I could see Udona and Orivy already talking about games that they could set up. While they were doing that, I decided to go ahead and check on what types of games came pre-loaded with this new system. There were actually quite a few, though 3 in particular caught my eye. Historical Treasure Hunt. This game automatically adjusts to the history and geography of all worlds owned by the Keeper. A series of hints will be given, at which point the players involved must locate on a map the location in order to score points. Eating Contest. An old classic from many worlds, this game allows the contestants to enjoy cuisine in a way that they normally cannot. By temporarily giving them bodies with preset parameters, including real hunger, they are able to set a type of food that they must devour, and the one who finishes the most wins. Keeper's Cards. This game involves cards taken from every item within the Keeper market. Whether it is a location, material, skill, individual, or a system. In order to play, the players must design their decks, each representing a world that they would control, and pit themselves against one another. Point limits can be assigned per game, to limit the size and level of a given deck. Well, that's interesting. Each of the games listed had value both as pure entertainment, and to help a keeper train themselves in one way or another. Whether it was testing willpower, familiarizing themselves with their worlds, or improving their general skills. Of course, this led to me being stuck playing games for a few days, but I wasn't going to complain. Chapter 145. Pairing Off. The next couple of days passed by rather quickly, with Orivy and Leowin pulling me into one game after another. Sometimes, we'd play the pre-installed games that had come with the new system, and other times they would have us play a game that they created or brought from the world below. Eventually, even the other goddesses became interested and got involved, until finally Tubrok couldn't hold back his curiosity as well. Right now, we were in the last game that we all were going to play before I went back down to be Tiber once again. We were playing Keeper's Cards, which thankfully allowed for any number of players. Which was good, because there weren't a whole lot of games from the world below that could work for 12 players. The premise of the game was actually pretty simple. As part of everyone's deck, they set aside cards to determine the stats of their world, such as culture, magic, technology, and so on. Then, when the game began, there would first be a preparation phase and an invasion phase. In the preparation phase, the players would be matched up in pairs randomly for the invasion, and the roles for it would be set. Then, each player could play 5 action cards for how they prepare for the invasion. This could range between fast forwarding to recover a lost population, training heroes, or discovering new technologies. Finally, the invasion phase began. This was where the real meat of the game took place. The invading player would choose whether they wanted to go all in, use an elite strike, or take a pass. If they chose either of the first two, then they play whatever cards they invest into their attack. For each invasion, the defender has a large advantage, because they have all of their cards to play to fight back. Furthermore, if they defeat the invasion, then they get to keep any cards that were not destroyed in the process to strengthen their world. However, if they lose the invasion, then their entire deck goes towards the invading player. Right now, most of the players had been eliminated, with only Bihana and Ryon left in the finals. Each one had acquired a total of 6 worlds, so they had a lot of options for every attack. At the same time, though, that made it harder to determine a victor. Alright. Baihaina took a deep breath as she organized her cards. It was her turn to attack, so she reached down for her action card. I go all in. They had been going back and forth for a few rounds with no clear winner, so while all in was a risky tactic that could leave her open for a counter on Rion's next turn, it was the only chance either one had to win. As she made her decision, the cards laid out before her began to float up into the air, forming a wall between Baihaina and Rion. These were all of the cards Baihaina could invest into her attack. However, Rion didn't panic. She smiled calmly as she declared her first line of defense, a move that she had used to defeat most of the invasions so far. I activate the runic colossi. 6 cards floated up to meet the wall that Baihaina had summoned. However, Baihaina simply laughed in response. Figured as much. Let's just see how this goes then. She grinned mischievously, as one by one the 6 cards that Rion had played dimmed, falling helplessly to the floor. They weren't alone, however, as several cards from Baihaina's wall fell as well. What? How'd you do that? Rion's expression changed, showing the shock at her defensive line being taken down. Only now did she notice one card near the center of the wall, realization dawning on her. You cheeky girl, you got a magic disruptor. Baihaina smiled knowingly, nodding her head at that. That's right. This has gone on long enough. As if of their own will, cards from Rion's side began shooting up, one by one to try to fight back the invading wall. However, each card dimmed like the last, helplessly falling back down. Soon, even the final cards, the ones that represented her world itself, began to dim. When the last light went out, all of the cards began to neatly arrange themselves, sliding along the floor to join Baihaina's own cards. Good game. Rion gave a soft smile as she extended a hand towards Baihaina, who happily shook it. I'm not the goddess of battle for nothing, you know. She teased lightly, shaking her head. With the game officially over, the cards faded away as if they had never been there. The rest of us gave a round of applause, and I stepped forward to join the two of them. Well, everyone, as much fun as this has been, I've got to be heading back now. My words were met with a few nods, some more reluctant than others. Leo in particular gave a sad sigh as she stepped forward, walking towards me before turning into a gray mist to enter my spiritual world again. We'll be back to play again later. Hopefully sooner this time. Just make sure to keep yourself safe. Irena said softly from the group, shaking her head. We'll all be watching over you. Well, they will, at least. Tubrok huffed with a light laugh. He lifted a hand, and one of the keeper's cards appeared in it. This little thing gave me an idea, so I'm gonna go see 'bout making it myself. Before he turned away, I was able to get a good look at the card. Runic Golem. Automated golem crafted from available resources. Durability dependent on material used. Attack strength dependent on material used. Population cost, 0. Material cost, 2. Requires tier 2 of any magic branch to produce. Additional tiers increase effectiveness by 50% per tier. Cost, 75. Ooh, let me help. Rion shot up to her feet and rushed off after Tubrok, clearly excited by the idea of creating something like this without the system's guidance. I could only chuckle as I watched the two of them walking off, shaking me head slightly. All right. Well, I'll head back down then. In truth, the voyage had come across the island that we were heading towards a couple of hours ago while we were still playing the game, but we simply paused the world instead of cutting the game short. See you in a second. Calliope grinned, with Udona nodding next to her. Irena just smiled at me, while Baihaina let out a sigh of relief at being free from guiding the ships now. Terra and Akalia seemed more interested in discussing different cards and strategies than seeing me off. Orivy ran up to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. Come back soon, bro. She muttered softly, making Ashley laugh and step forward to pry her off of me. I shook my head again with a small grin as I operated the menu to descend down to the world. Like the first time that I came down as Tiber, I felt my joints briefly stiffen up, groaning as the pains of old age hit me again. Even though it was not as bad as if I was a normal person, it was still uncomfortable to go from 20 years old to 60 in the time it takes to blink. I found myself sitting on top of my bench again at the front of the Jolly Dodger, the ocean air at my back. As if it had been timed for my arrival, Amana's voice rang out from behind me. Drop anchor. Glancing around, I saw that the ships were arranged in a line, side by side, rather than the circular formation before. And in front of us, close enough to easily swim, was a large island. Or at least, I knew it was an island. The giant mass of land extended far beyond the horizon in both directions, making it easily mistakable for a continent of its own, if you didn't have an aerial view of it. In truth, the island was roughly 300 kilometers across, covered in a dense forest. If we weren't aiming for the Elven continent, this island wouldn't actually be a bad choice to settle on and create a colony. Druids, ye'll be making a portal on this land as well. Amana called out, her voice echoing into my mind. If we need any more supplies than we can carry this time, we'll return through the portals before we get too far away. For now, everyone choose who to send ashore. After she said that, the mana reverberation stopped, showing that she had ended her magical conference call. Alright, everyone. I need 1 scout to volunteer to go ashore, and 3 combatants to volunteer to stay behind. Aside from that, all of the combat staff are going to gather supplies. Almost immediately, Saru jumped to attention, volunteering to join the expedition. This was the first chance anyone had had to get off the boat since the dungeon, aside from jumping from ship to socialize with the other crews. For the ones that stayed behind, there were 2 mages and an archer, with everyone else jumping from the ship to head ashore. Next time, please remember to add a dinghy or something to these boats. I prayed inwardly, knowing that at least someone would be listening while I slid along an ice platform towards the land. Yes, my way was faster, but I could see several people that simply sank like a stone and had to jump up repeatedly to get a breath of air while they walked under the water. Sorry, Dale. Surprisingly, it was Akalia that answered me. Guess she got done discussing strategies with Terra, or was multitasking. There just wasn't really a way to do so with what we have. A dinghy would be too fragile, and get destroyed against any random monster that got near the ship. We're working on alternatives that we can achieve with our current means, though. It should be implemented by the next trip. I nodded my head at that, at least they were considering these things. I was pretty sure that once I lifted the level cap, there would be fewer and fewer people that were actually able to swim. Though, that did make me wonder about several things, but we'll see how it all plays out later. Once we got to the island, I glanced around and saw the various people walking up from the water, their fur completely drenched. In total, around 100 people had come to the island, but we weren't planning on moving together as one unit. And just as the thought came to my mind, Amana's voice sounded in my ears, which was disorienting since she remained back on the ship with the rest of the captains. Alright, everyone, spread out and find anything that looks salvageable. But, make sure ye keep yourselves safe. If ye get into danger, join up with the others to fight it off, or head back to the ship. Do not, and I repeat, do not eat anything until it has been appraised. Aside from that, go and pillage to her heart's content. There was a brief round of laughter before several people dashed into the forest. Surprisingly, Kelly did not join them, and instead walked over to stay near me. Don't suppose you'd mind having a partner for this trip. The others would kill me if I let anything happen to you. I chuckled softly, smiling towards her and nodding. All right, let's just try to be careful. Kelly nodded as well, patting the metal shield that she had gotten from the dungeon. Yup, that's what I brought this bad boy for. Finally getting the chance to properly test it out. She had a wide grin on her face as she led the way, pushing aside bushes and branches to advance past the beach and into the island's jungle. Chapter 146. I Spy. The 2 of us proceeded calmly through the outer layer of the jungle, but we didn't let down our guard. If there was anywhere that might pose a risk to my safety, it would be out in the wild, whether from poison or an ambush. Although Calliope and the other goddesses could watch from above, there was still a chance that something they didn't consider a threat might surprise them. As for me, I was doing my best to identify the various plants that we came across. With the new Keeper's Cards game, I had chosen to copy my world to use as a base to play off of. It was an idea to help me come up with strategies later on, once I saw that the option was available. But because of that, I was able to see the card versions of all the different plants and animals in the world. Okay, so maybe not all of them. It's not like I had a billion cards in my deck, nor would I have had the time to study that many. But any that had special effects that would influence the world in some way, such as being useful in alchemy, or having special properties all their own. In total, there were just over 100 of those cards like that which made up my world deck. Remember, we only need to bring back 2 or 3 samples of each type of plant. I reminded Kelly, who had begun picking every hanging fruit or weed she could find. It's more important to remember where we got everything. You do have the scout class, right? Kelly let out a groan, letting go of the weed that she was having difficulty pulling. Even with her immense strength, It seemed that its roots had either gone too deep or were too strong to pull. Which likely meant that we couldn't eat it anyways. Yeah, only 6 levels, though. I did most of my training this time before exploring. 6 levels definitely wasn't bad. If not for the voyage that we were on, I'd only have 1. As it stands, I had shot up to a level 25 scout a couple of weeks ago. Alright, then I'll be the one to mark the locations. I nodded my head slightly as I said that. One of the perks of the scout class was something akin to a mental map. By taking in all of the sensory data you receive and cataloging it, it allows your mind to project a map that only you can see. Naturally, this lets you mark points of interest to remember locations for later, but it won't update your map unless you can sense the area in some way, so there is no telling if something happened there. For instance, with my 25 levels in Scout, I could effortlessly lead us back to the ship from where we were now. However, I couldn't accurately lead a journey all the way back to the Beastkin continent, for the simple reason that I had to sleep during parts of the journey, so the map is incomplete. As I focused on the Scout class, I noticed something. A small ping on the mental map, which I immediately focused on. Closing my eyes, I could see, off into the bushes near us, a form of echolocation. Gentle paw prints pressing on the ground, claws scraping against leaves. Aside from myself and Kelly, there was a quiet breathing near us. Kelly, off to our left. 8 meters out, possibly edible. My last words caught her attention immediately, making her look in that direction. Soon enough, something that looked like a green panther jumped out of the bushes just as I opened my eyes. Its fur was colored perfectly to blend in with the surroundings, making me wonder if that was a special effect of the creature. However, it wasn't one that I recognized from the cards, so it likely wasn't strong enough to be classified as a consideration by the system. Level 64 Ganth. That was an interesting name for it. But if that was as strong as it was, then it was no better than the slimes that we had fought in the dungeon. And sure enough, one solid punch from Kelly caught it mid-leap, creating a sickening crunch as its neck bent at a bad angle. It barely had the time to whimper before falling to the ground, its life bar blinking out as fast as it appeared. Haven't had one of these before. Kelly mumbled, licking her lips as she looked at the Gantha. After a brief moment, she reached down and touched its body, causing it to disappear and become a piece of paper. Since we didn't have enough bags to carry everything back, the quest system proved incredibly useful. I let out a low chuckle, shaking my head before an odd purple fruit caught my eye. It was hanging from a tall tree, over a dozen meters above us. Its shape was like a spiked ball, pins coming off of it from all angles. Now this I recognized. It took me a brief moment to recall the information from the card about this particular item. Reset fruit. A purple, edible fruit. Consuming this offers low calories, but will remove the last level acquired by the user. As a side effect, memories pertaining to that level may also be lost, causing short-term amnesia. Effects stack with multiple uses. Requires game system within the world to grow. Food quality. 0.5. Utility. 2. 12 points. Kelly. I grinned as I grabbed her attention, causing her to look at me in confusion, following my eyes up towards the fruit. You know something about those, boss. Seeing as she wasn't aware of what the reset fruit was, I wasn't all that surprised. Her domains of strength and fortitude offered little in the way of herbology. It's a good item. Yeah. Erases the last level you gained when you eat it. I don't remember ever seeing any on the Beastkin continent, so we should probably grab some and store them for later. Ooh. Nice. She grinned widely, kicking off the ground to jump high onto the branch where the fruits were hanging. There's a ton of them up here. How many you think I should take? Hearing her call down from above to ask that, I couldn't help but shrug. Just as many as you can put in a scroll. We can get more later when we come back. Immediately, I put down a marker on the mental map, a reminder of where we found the fruit. As I did, I heard an amused chuckle in my mind, Tara apparently taking the chance to speak up. Nice catch there. Those fruits are really only native to the islands in this region. How does something like that even grow naturally? I figured that I would have to buy level reduction items from the market originally. There was a soft tugging on my lips as I held back a smile, realizing that this had saved me some future purchases. The energy of the system is everywhere. Although it is incredibly rare, it's possible for things to evolve that can manipulate it in some way. For instance, there is a disease that plagued the humans centuries ago, known as the Pinnacle Plague. It was no more than a common flu to normal people, but it fed off the power of the system lingering on a person's body to grow stronger. The higher your level, the bigger the threat. Then, isn't it possible for a person to have a birth defect where the system reacts differently to them in some way? Hearing that something like this was possible through common evolution only made me worry about other possibilities. Among monsters or animals, sure. Tara explained patiently, apparently having predicted I'd ask that. But any race you purchase is protected from those types of evolutions. They can become stronger naturally, but in order to get new effects like that, you would need to buy the anomaly system from the market. It allows people among the races you purchase to very rarely be born with a power either above or beyond the normal system. Imagine someone born with infinite mana or ki, or the natural ability to have their soul leave their body for a time without training any classes. I had to admit that the idea was interesting, and possibly worthwhile, but there was a strong reason why I wouldn't do something like that. There are bad anomalies too, right? Things that would be a danger to a keeper's life if triggered accidentally. You got it in one. Tara seemed rather happy that I was able to guess that on my own. In any case of random chance, there is a high and a low. A strong anomaly might have infinite mana, or a regenerating body, but a weak anomaly might have the opposite. Complete rejection to mana, or a body that eats away at itself. There might even be someone born that uses a completely different system of magic, though those would be rarer than Tribal's celibate episodes. That brought a small laugh out of me, making Kelly look at me in confusion when she jumped down from the tree. Sorry, it's Tara, I explained, getting a knowing "ah" from her in response. Okay, so the anomalies aren't specifically good or bad, but they can be dangerous at times. Noted. However, you said that monsters could be born that manipulate the system. Rather than Tara answering, it was Akalia that butted in there. And this is where I step in, Dale. She spoke with an obvious grin in her voice. Actually, there are 3 monsters in the present world born that can manipulate the energy of the system in one way or another. One of them is super deadly, able to completely strip away all levels of its victim, returning them to their most basic statistics. Thankfully, it is on an unpopulated island far away from anyone else. And no, not the island you are on, or anywhere near it. I nearly fell over when she mentioned what the monster could do, as well as it being on an uninhabited island. If they sent me to where that thing was, I'd be ascending as quickly as I possibly could. The second one is a little fox monster, currently hiding in a little cave in the Elven continent. Its ability is no weaker than the first, but in the other direction. It can actually add 30% to all class levels to people it becomes affectionate towards. Thankfully, the elves haven't found it, or they'd be way stronger. I couldn't help but subconsciously nod as I heard that. A fox able to bestow levels was definitely strong. The third and final one. Wait, sorry. Never mind, it just got eaten. It was a bird, which had been born with the ability to siphon levels away and give them to itself. Like the others, it had never been found, so its ability had never been used before. With her explanation finished, I could hear Tara clearing her throat to take the conversation back from Akalia. Anyways, you don't really have to worry about that for now. A creature born mutated to influence the system energy is so rare that no more than 5 would ever appear in a world your size at once. If it was Desbar, they'd be lucky if even one such creature appeared in a generation. But one thing that they all have in common, the influence of the system energy makes it impossible for them to breed unless a monster is specifically purchased to be able to do that. Well, that was good at least. If creatures like that were able to breed later generations and become commonplace, they could basically destroy the world. As it was, just the first or third examples alone would become threats on a national level if they were ever placed in civilization. Thanks for the explanation. By the way, what happens if someone eats enough reset fruit to drop their level below 0? Or if they ate I think it was called a surge root, to get above the level limit. Now that the main topic was out of the way, I figured I would ask a question that had been bugging me since I saw the small fruits. The reset fruit won't do anything to a creature that doesn't have the influence of the system on them. But if someone really did send themselves all the way to level 0, they'd become like a toddler, unable to speak or walk on their own. As for the roots, if someone forced more of the system's energy into their body than it allows, either through the root or that fox, kaboom. Okay, not going to ask for specifics. Kaboom is quite clear enough, thank you. So note to self, do not go looking for the magic fox. Chapter 147. Resupplying and setting sail. After the failed ambush by the Gantha, I wasn't all the worried about the potential dangers that this island's animals could present. If a level 60 creature could function as a predator on the island, then that meant that it would serve as a good judge of what the rest of the island would be like in terms of power. After all, a level 60 can't hunt level 200 creatures, and if some of those were on the island, there wouldn't be any food left for the little Gantha. Sure enough, we did come across a few other creatures, but they were all below level 100. By the time we returned to the shore a few hours later when we were done pillaging, most of the other groups were there already. As I looked around at the various groups, I saw that none of them had really encountered any trouble. Though, some of them had their clothes torn a bit, likely by thorny bushes or attacks from sudden predators. Once the last group came back a few minutes later, our attention was turned towards our voyage leader. All right, lads and lasses. Amana grinned from a chair that she had apparently brought over from the ship while we were gone. Bring out our spoils, and let's have it. I trust everyone remembered where they got their goods, so we won't have to search blindly. Later, after she spoke, an aged felon woman stepped up from next to her, someone that I hadn't seen before. No doubt, she was a member of one of the other crews, and a non-combat crew member at that going by her level. This here is Dahlia, one of the best herbalists that we could find. It'll be her job to determine what is edible, what is useful, and what gets thrown away. Those of us that had gone gathering nodded towards Dahlia respectfully. No need for any formalities. She chuckled dryly, moving over to the group at the far end to begin. Now, let's see what you brought out for me. Her smile was gentle, like an old grandmother, her squinted eyes making it seem as if the smile spread across her entire face naturally. The group that she had chosen, the elementalist twins from another ship, began pulling out their scrolls and calling out both the beasts and plants that had been stored inside. Dahlia didn't even glance towards the dead animals, someone else coming over to take away, and instead began to examine the plants one by one. First, she skillfully disassembled each plant into the various pieces, the outer and inner shells, the roots and stems, and so forth. Then, she carefully took each piece and smelled it. At this stage, she simply tossed away several items, such as the roots of a blackweed or a small yellow fruit the size of a grape. With the pieces that were left, she took them one at a time, and placed them gently against her wrist, holding them there for a few moments as she focused. Each time after she was done, she gently wiped off her wrist before deciding whether or not to throw that component away, causing the pile to dwindle further. At this point, about a third of the original potential ingredients from the twins had been discarded. Finally, the pieces that were left seemed to be ready for the last round of testing. One by one she collected them again, and held them in her palm. I could feel the natural energy warp above her hand, showing that she had some skill as a druid as well. Water quickly gathered into a bubble surrounding the ingredient, and slowly began to boil. When she was done with this step, she placed each ingredient to her lips, giving them a small taste. Once again, many pieces had been thrown away, leaving less than half of the original pile. However, she seemed satisfied with those that were left. Looking towards the sisters, she gave a small nod. These are all edible, she explained, pointing at the pile that remained. However, she wasn't done yet. Moving to the discarded pile, she once again began picking ingredients. This time, she ground them to a pulp before boiling each into its own paste. Then, she took just a small amount of paste from each, and took turns applying it gently to her arm. Her eyes seemed to light up, and I could faintly sense fluctuations of mana coming from her as she tested each item. She shook her head with a sigh, discarding the copies of an ingredient after the first test. Other times, she would smile happily, putting them into their own pile. Twice even, her health bar appeared over her head, showing that the paste she had applied had caused a small amount of actual damage to her. Rather than being alarmed, she simply moved those into another pile as well. The entire process to examine the different plants provided by the twins took nearly 2 full hours. Given that there were around 50 teams, there was no possible way that we could get through them all by the end of the day. However, she simply moved on to the next and repeated the process again. For any items that she had previously judged, she either discarded them or placed them into their respective pile of edible, useful for poison, or trash. This already greatly diminished the pile from the second team, until there were only about 5 plants that needed tested. To my surprise, one of those plants happened to be the reset fruit that Kelly and I had previously gathered. Dahlia went about her routine, slowly analyzing each item to determine what to keep or throw away. This went without any real differences from before, until she got to the reset fruit. With this one, she had already broken apart the outer shell, revealing a gooey pink gel interior. When she had boiled the reset fruit and tested it on her lips, she gave her first real surprised expression. It was enough that even Amana's attention had been drawn to her in concern, though Dahlia's health bar was nowhere to be seen. Is everything all right? Dahlia slowly pulled the fruit back, staring off into the space in front of her. The world's voice has told me that I lost a rank as pirate. She spoke softly, but her face showed some confusion. However, I still have the same rank as before. Curious. As if this required further investigation immediately, she ate the rest of the fruit and waited a moment, shaking her head. Captain Amana, please remember the number 9. Amana still seemed confused at this, but nodded her head while Dahlia gathered another of the reset fruits from the pile, and boiled it as well. When she ate it, her eyes flashed in surprise once again. Captain, the number was 9, correct? That's correct, Dahlia. Is something the matter? It was Scout this time. But the number seems wrong now that I look at it. She explained, realization dawning on her face. This fruit seems to have a special property that removes the power of the world from those that eat it. I see. Amana nodded her head gently. Lady Dahlia, pray tell. How long avenue we been on our voyage? She crossed her arms beneath her chest and stared intently at Dahlia, who put on a perplexed face of her own. It must have been 5 months by my count, Captain. She answered, though it was clear that she seemed unsure of her own response. Amana's voice suddenly turned gentle, not carrying her normal pirate accent. Dahlia, perhaps you should rest for the day, see if you can recover from the effects of the fruit. We can resume tomorrow. Captain, how long has our journey been? Dahlia asked, and for the first time her voice began to shake, as if she was afraid that she had lost something important. Almost 7 months now. Amana shook her head in response, causing Dahlia to freeze up. The elderly woman slumped down, knowing that a piece of her mind had been chipped away with her levels. Just rest for now. Maybe it will come back with a good night's sleep. Dahlia nodded her head weakly, moving the rest of the reset fruits into the pile for alchemy, before walking towards the shore. Then, Captain, I'll take my leave for now. Her voice was still shaking as she stepped onto the water, forming a patch of ice that slowly carried her to the nearest boat. Amana simply gave a nod to that, before turning towards the rest of us. She took a deep breath, and her stoic face returned to normal. All right, lads. Fun's over for tonight. She pointed at the plants that had either been marked as edible or useful for alchemy. Anyone who found the locations of any of those, head off to where ye found them to collect as many as ye can carry. Anyone who didn't, join up with someone that did. Be back on the ships by sundown. Unsurprisingly, almost all of the parties immediately turned to head into the jungle again, having gathered at least one of those ingredients themselves. Those who didn't paired up with the nearest team. As for myself and Kelly, it was obvious that we at least knew where the reset fruits were, but there were also a few other fruits and roots that we knew about as well. Another hour later, the sun was just starting to come up as we climbed back onto the ship, mine and Kelly's bags filled with the quest scrolls. Each scroll had a picture of what was contained inside on it to serve for easy identification, so we sorted through them and placed them into the appropriate crates below deck upon our return. This was actually my first time heading below deck myself, so I was finally able to see what it looked like down there. The first lower deck was almost entirely taken by large crates, most of which were empty. In those that weren't, there were stacked scrolls that appeared to carry objects such as planks of wood, copper nails, tools, fabric, and potions. Each crate could easily hold thousands of scrolls, so the sheer number of spare supplies was mind-boggling. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that half of a kingdom's wealth likely went into the trade goods to place in these ships. I also noticed that each crate was labeled, either with a claw or a curled tail. Following Kelly, I learned that those marked with the claw were for the main quest scrolls, and those with the tail were for the paired scroll. While this essentially dropped the number of supplies down by half, it was still a ridiculous amount. The two of us went through and found where the scrolls containing the fruits that we had gathered were stored, and deposited them in the proper places. From there, we returned above deck to have our meal and relax for the evening. The next day, the identification process started again, bright and early with everyone on the shore. Dahlia was once again there, though her trademark smile seemed lessened. Obviously, neither her levels nor her memory had been returned to her after resting. Yet she had a job to do, and was likely one of only maybe 2 herbalists in the entire fleet qualified to do it. With each team that she went through, cataloging their plants, they began to bring out less and less. Nobody bothered to retrieve an item that she had already appraised, so each team was handled more swiftly than the last. After the 10th team, only 5 hours had passed from the start of the process, and several teams started stepping back from the line. Likely they had nothing new to show her. Kelly and I were near the end of her line, so it was no surprise that we had long since stepped back before she had gotten to us on the 7th hour. After she had apparently appraised the last item that was brought for her, she gave a satisfied nod. It seems that everything is in order. Captain, if you don't mind, I'd like to return to my ship to rest. Amana didn't even say anything in response, only giving a gentle nod to dismiss Dahlia. Once she was gone, we were all again sent out to find any of the items that had been deemed appropriate, spending the next 3 days to fill all of the crates in all of the ships. While the work was long and rather tedious, it was still a welcome respite from the constant sitting about that took place on the ship itself. By the time that we left the island, there was little doubt in my mind that we had made a serious dent in its ecosystem, though at the same time I knew that it would be able to recover before anyone else appeared there. Chapter 148. The Maybe Future Queen. The easiest way to summarize the rest of the journey would be to compare it to the first few months, but in reverse. The monsters and creatures that we began encountering were gradually starting to get weaker again as the weeks moved by, though we were seeing new varieties that we had not encountered on the first leg of our trip. Roughly 2 weeks after we left the island, Amana sent a bit of good news our way. It seemed like Dahlia had regained her lost memories from the reset fruit after she gained another level as a scout and a pirate. The fact that there was a way to restore the memories, and that it wasn't all that difficult, was a good sign. Another important thing to note was that the crew morale had gone the highest it had been since we were cut off from the mainland. Apparently, the introduction of new food, and the ability to eat a more balanced meal really set everyone straight. Though, this wasn't without complications of its own. I let out a low groan as I put a hand over my stomach, feeling it unsettled from the recent meal. While all of the ingredients we had used were certainly edible, it couldn't be helped that the chefs had never worked with them before. What made matters worse were that some species had aversive reactions to certain ingredients, like a minor allergy. That's what I was currently struggling with, having to deal with my body trying to reject the food I had just eaten. Part of me wanted to just give in and head back to the admin room, allowing my host to complete the voyage until we reached the Elven lands. However, I couldn't let myself do that. From everything I had been told, I just knew that I'd be able to get a pretty good achievement for going through this journey myself. So I held firm. I didn't let myself give in to the temptations to retreat, and simply kept up with my task of guiding the ship. Through storms or battles, I kept the wind at our backs. My role was not to fight, so I didn't. Thankfully, I still wasn't alone on this journey. You okay, Tiber? Disney asked curiously, having been sitting next to me when I grabbed my stomach. As a felon, she wasn't affected by the same roots that my body sought to reject. Yet, seeing my face, she knew what was going on, grimacing. You had the stew, didn't you? I didn't expect them to put wolfsbane in it. I muttered softly, nodding my head. Wolfsbane was the name that had been given to the root which lichens had a difficult time digesting. Likewise, there was lionsbane and foxbane for the felon and kitsune. Oddly enough, none of the ingredients posed any problems for the Ursa, though maybe they just had a stronger natural constitution. Well, they're still trying to figure out the recipes. Disney sighed, leaning back against the bench. Ever since we left the island, she had been coming to sit and chat with me at least once a day. Whether it was out of boredom, or just seeing that I appeared lonely, I wasn't sure. But it was a welcome respite from the monotony that was simply guiding the Jolly Dodger. You know, I probably shouldn't say this, but you could take some of the cursed fruit when we get to the shore. That way you can get the rest of the reward that was promised. The cursed fruit was the name that had been given to the reset fruit, because it appeared to have been cursed by the gods to reject the world's power. I simply chuckled, however, and shook my head. I might, but losing my memories is really not something I'd be fond of. The princess nodded her head in understanding. I can see that. In truth, from what she said, she had hated the dirty trick that the nobles pulled with the quest contracts, promising the pinnacle class's nobility that they couldn't truly gain if they completed the quest. I wouldn't want to lose any of my memories either. Even if it was just a few days or weeks of this journey. As long as it's actually been kind of fun, you know. As she continued, she looked upwards, at the billowing sails overhead, caught in the controlled wind. Here I get to sing and dance with everyone, and just talk to the crew. But once we land, I'll have to be the Queen apparent, and act as the leader until others get here. I couldn't help but smile bitterly at that. Do you think that they'd be able to follow us, and land on the same shore? The sea is vast, Disney, with many a port to call home. The felon princess giggled slightly as she nodded to that, smiling in my direction. I know that. That's one of the reasons that we have so many people here. 245 people, with around 60 of each race. Even if it takes decades, or even 200 years, the royal scholars believe that we have enough people to build a colony that will last until they find us. If they can't find our children's children by then we just weren't destined to be found in the first place. I couldn't help but nod at that. There were indeed quite a lot of people here, maybe even enough to build a stable, thriving population. As long as the reinforcements arrived within a few generations, the beastkin might really create a solid footing within the elven continent. Tell me the truth. Do you have a way to contact the mainland once we find a shore to call home? Disney glanced at me in surprise, but then seemed to grow conflicted on whether or not to answer. Well, there is one way. But we really have no idea if it'll even work. Before we left, the third queen created a guild called New World Hope with several members of her court, myself included. When we arrive, it's my job to create a branch of the guild in the city we create. Saying that, she let out a long sigh, smiling bitterly as she looked out to the raging waves in the distance. It seemed that another storm was going to head our way before long. But we don't know if the world will allow the guild messages to reach from one land to another. And even if it does, the messenger could be attacked long before it actually makes it back. It took me a moment to realize what she meant. Guild branches were able to communicate from one to another, like the Tower of Communication in the Elven lands. However, it did so through the process of creating an artificial creature to carry the message, like a bird. Such creatures could still be brought down by wild monsters or even people wanting to intercept the messages. I see. The fact that it probably won't work is why you haven't told the rest of the crew yet. I muttered, closing my eyes while my stomach felt like it was flipping over once again. You'd rather wait until we get there, and come up with the idea to give them hope. Even if it was a long shot, it'll be the only thing that they could cling onto. There was a dry laugh from Disney as she nodded her head. And according to my mother, it'll help the people recognize me as the queen of the new land, putting me in a position of power until the others arrive. If I'm still alive and on the throne when the rest get there, I might be asked to step down to make way for other candidates. But if they take long enough that I have given the throne to a new generation, then that generation will be recognized as the rightful ruler of the new kingdom. I couldn't help but glance over incredulously at her. So they have, 40 years to find us if they want to have any right to a throne. And if they take longer than that, they lose the rights to it. Well, that's what I said. Disney grinned slightly as she confirmed my thoughts. This was something my mother set up. If the journey is so easy that they can arrive quickly, without all of the extra power we invested in this voyage, then there is simply no reason to leave me with the crown. But if I go through peril after peril, fighting against all odds to establish myself where none can easily follow, then I will have earned my place as the official first queen of the new kingdom. Little did they know that there was already a kingdom where we were going, and that we were heading straight for there. Port. I felt a knowing smirk on my face as I thought about all of that. So part of you is hoping that they aren't able to make it in time. And part of you is hoping to be able to see your family again. This time, it was her turn to look shocked, but she soon gave a brief nod. I can still see them, sometimes. She let out a sigh, and I felt a mana fluctuation from her body. When I focus, I can use the teachings of the forest to cast my vision far away and see my mother. But it grows harder each day as we get further apart. This is a technique that I never learned. I told her, not worrying about blowing my cover or anything. As far as anyone was concerned, I was specialized as a druid, though some had figured out what my second class was. It wouldn't surprise anyone that I was missing a few mage tricks. And as I guessed, Disney gave a small smile as she looked at me. It's mostly taught to royalty and nobility, but there's no law against teaching others. The captains here use a similar trick to project their voices to one another, though doing so is a bit harder. To start, close your eyes and imagine the face of someone you know. The clearer the image, the better. She waited until I had closed my eyes, and felt the mana fluctuating from my body before she continued. Now, imagine that they were standing right in front of you. That if you just opened your eyes, you could see them. Then, and this is the tricky part, you need to open your eyes without opening your eyes. Focus on it with your mana, but don't let your real eyes open. Although the explanation was lacking, I could understand what she meant. My blackened vision immediately seemed to clear, turning into a fog of red. Amidst the fog were 5 figures, all looking to be just shy of their teenage years and wearing blood-colored clothes. Naturally, most everyone I actually knew was either a goddess, or part of this voyage. But there were 2 exceptions. The world spirits, and the martial spirits. Since the world spirits keep fluttering in and out of the world, I chose to focus on the latter. And to my surprise, I saw that they had acquired a 5th member, this one a boy. As I watched them walking through the red fog, they suddenly stopped. The girl leading in the front, Scarlet, turned her head to look in my direction. Immediately, the red fog vanished from around the 5 of them, and they were standing at the edge of a wide canyon. Seeing this, the others looked surprised, and one of them turned to say something to Scarlet, though their voices couldn't be heard. Scarlet didn't answer, simply staring at where my sight was coming from for a long moment. I thought I saw a brief smile on her face before she shook her head. When she lifted her hand, a blood-red energy surged up from her surroundings, and my sight was instantly cut off. I let out a gasp of pain as I felt the recoil of the connection being broken. Disney, still sitting beside me, looked to me in worry. That can happen sometimes, don't worry. A lot of people accidentally break the connection like that on their first try. It seemed that she was misunderstanding, thinking that I had done something wrong when I practiced the technique. In reality, it seemed like Scarlet noticed that she was being spied on, and thought it could have been an enemy. Given my current mana limits, it was no wonder she could sever the connection with a simple wave of her hand. I see. So that's what you've been seeing when you looked at your mother. I glanced towards Disney as I asked that, and she gave a sad nod. Yeah, I see her sitting at her desk every night, 2 scrolls in front of her. I see her waiting to see which one breaks first. Sometimes, she can't take it and starts crying, and I think she might be afraid that something happened to me and I lost the scrolls before dying. I can never hear her voice, but I can see her calling out to me. I blinked in surprise as I heard that, glancing towards Disney. Why doesn't your mother just use the same technique to watch over you? Or have someone else do the same? Disney let out a low laugh, reaching down to grab her own stomach. Wouldn't you know it, the trick doesn't work on bards who know how to harness the voice of the goddesses. Clerics, either. We think that the goddesses simply refuse to be observed by mortals, so any who use their power can't be seen through the eyes of the forest. Even if she were to watch you right now, she wouldn't be able to see me sitting here. That's why we had to use the scrolls. But for all she knows, we might have just taken them from you and thrown you overboard. Disney smiled bitterly at my comment, silently agreeing. This is a really messed up situation you've gotten yourself in. Oh, I know it. She laughed, this time more genuinely, before standing up. I've gotta go cheer up the crew, and you need to get ready for the storm, so this is where we'll end it here today. As she walked off, I gave a small nod, before thinking inwardly. How much longer till we get to Cowabunga? I'm about ready for this journey to be over already. To my surprise, it was actually Irena that spoke up into my mind, her voice soft and comforting. 2 more months, they said. Everything should just get easier from here, Dale. Given how long she waited in the underworld, it felt kind of bad to be homesick after a mere few months, when I thought about it. All right, I thought back to her, leaning back against the bench. Just 2 more months, then. Chapter 149. What are they? The year was 651, and the city of Cowabunga had risen greater than ever before. The originally small port city had grown exponentially, but the declining population made the great city feel empty. While it was true that the city stretched from one end of the horizon to the other, less than half of the homes were in use. Many residents had left for greener pastures, the budding kingdom in the west. Yet those who remained were not saddened by this loss. In fact, their spirits were high and their faces bright as they cleaned the streets. Shiwin had recently ended, and the residents had to help clean up the streets to make way for the traffic that would once again be appearing. From the Tower of Communication, news was spreading that the Queen had troubled times were coming. The kingdoms of the East and West were unable to see eye to eye, and it seemed that the first true war of the elves was upon them. In fact, this war would have likely taken place sooner, had the silent generation not ended when it did. As the goddess brought her voice down again, the kingdoms could not help but still their ambitions. In the direct center of the city, the home which once belonged to the daughter of the goddess herself had now become the palace of the city lord. Inside, He would always have a shaman acting daily to help foresee possible dangers to the land, be it invading monsters or terrible storms. Today's shaman was a mature elven woman. Her long red hair glistened as it fell down her back, while her almost glowing green eyes focused on the crystal orb before her. The same orb which had once been the power source of the city's wards, now used to protect the city from future threats. This is strange, sire. She spoke softly, yet her words were alarming to the man who stood not far away. Unlike the shaman, the city lord was an old man, likely near the end of his life. He had lived through the silent generation, and had even caught a glimpse of the holy daughter before her. Passing. What's the matter, Uvona? Speak clearly. He told her, his voice cracking with age. If not for the training in his youth, it was unlikely that this old man would even be able to support himself at his age. I see people approaching the city from the east. When Uvona spoke, the city lord raised his eyebrows questioningly. Far beyond the low tide. 11, no, 12 disturbances of nature working in harmony, druids working together. They are still too far away to see more clearly. This news was quite unusual indeed. Regardless of the direction that they were coming from, the Western Kingdom was landlocked on all sides, one of its natural barriers to protect against the creatures of the sea. They had no seafaring ships to speak of, especially none that could go beyond the fishing waters to circle the land. When will they arrive? Tonight, sire. Unova answered confidently. They come guided by the traveler. Her last words shocked the man even more. There was always that possibility if they came from the Eastern Sea, but the traveler held a special significance. If they came by the dragon or the snake, or even the tide, the signs would point towards hostility. But the Lord was an old man, and he had seen many things. He had seen the child of the goddess walk the land, seen her power. And following her death, he watched as her mother had mourned for an entire generation. Now, merely a year since her return, and people journey from the eastern seas, sailing beneath the traveler. If he did not take this as a sign, he did not deserve his position. Prepare a welcoming party, he told the shaman, closing his clouded eyes. Tell them that the goddess sends people from a distant land. Have food and drink ready to nourish their bodies, and a bard to write their tale. As he spoke, he turned to leave, heading towards his own office. And just in case, alert the guards. These are troubled times, and we must show caution. If the traveler shall send us peace, we shall meet it with kindness. If it sends us war, then we must defend our home. Unova nodded her head unhesitantly, drawing a cloth over the crystal ball before leaving to deliver the message. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. I could feel my body growing more and more weary from the travels by the day. Though the food managed to improve with practice, the toll of the journey was as hard on the spirit as it was on the flesh. If not for the constant updates from the admin room, letting me know how close we were, I would already have returned to take another break. As it was, I knew that we would reach Cowabunga by sunrise. This belief was further reinforced when our scout shouted down from the basket above. Captain, land. This was by no means a shock to everyone, as we had gone out of our way to visit many islands over the last 2 months, ensuring that we had a chain of portals leading back to the island where we harvested. Yet, the scout's next words shook most everyone to their cores. And, I see buildings. And ships. The scout had grown even more impressive over the many months in the journey, and gained several levels. His eyes had been further strengthened, and he could make out details at the far end of the horizon. Given his elevated position, it was no wonder that he could make out the buildings of Cowabunga, and even some of their fishing ships. A murmur broke out over the crew, while the other ships began to receive similar reports. Some were asking if we had circled the world, and arrived at the lands beyond the east of the Beastkin. But those who had traveled knew better. By now, the concept of time zones was not an unfamiliar thing to the world. With druids able to easily traverse from one side of a continent to another in a matter of minutes, it soon became clear that the sun did not rise and set at the same time everywhere. To those scholars, this allowed them to make a rough guess as to how big the world was, and how small their piece of it. No doubt this was one of the driving factors behind the journey, the belief that they did not hold the only piece of land on such a vast world. The existence of countless islands only proved this point, and our journey had not been nearly long enough to cross the distance the scholars believed would be needed. Calm yourselves. Amana shouted out, grinning to herself. It looks like we be meeting some new friends. All fighters, rest and recuperate. This distance won't be crossed in merely a few hours, and we need be ready in case these friends decide to not be so friendly. If they are, we'll have a merry time. But if not, We'll show them that we're no pushovers." There was an uproar of laughter from the crew, several people immediately moving down below deck. Yet, it was unmistakable that everyone was equally excited. This would be their first time meeting another group of people in the history of Beastkin, ever since the four tribes came together. Udona likely didn't tell Amana what was at the end of this journey, because it would ruin the fun, or something. All that the captain knew was that the course had been set by a higher power, but that alone was enough for her not to be surprised at the presence of a reported city on the horizon. Soon, the only ones left above the deck were myself, Amana, and the scout high up in the basket. With the shallow waters we had been through lately, we had not encountered a beast needing the entire crew to fight for some time. In this region, the Kraken alone would be enough to defeat any seafaring monsters. Like those below deck, I took this time to relax and close my eyes, only focusing in the corner of my mind to keep the ship moving at a steady pace. By the time my eyes opened, darkness had consumed the night sky. The city, which had been seen only by the scout, now stood in plain sight to everyone. At a glance, the architecture was different compared to the Beastkin. Where they used wood and bricks to build manually, the elves preferred shaping raw stone with the aid of their druids. This led to the buildings often being large and cylindrical, as opposed to the rectangular buildings of the Beastkin. Even the tops of their buildings, while still having a curved edge that led downwards off the side to offer some shade and protection from the weather, were clearly just one single piece. As we got closer to the shore, we could see dozens of magical lights hovering above the heads of various elves. By now, the rest of the crew had come out, some rested while others had been too excited to shut their eyes. Those who could see far enough were all wondering what type of creature the elves were, all staring in confusion. Unlike the Beastkin, there did not appear to be any animal resemblance among the elves. At least, no animal that the Beastkin knew of. Could they be serpent-kin? One asked. Just look at their ears and colorful hair, like the fins and scales of a mighty serpent. This theory gradually gained weight among the crew of the Jolly Dodger, though some rejected it. The elves simply did not have anything that they could spot, such as a tail or scales. Their hair practically shone in the moonlight, and many near the port could be seen holding woven baskets. Naturally, it did not take them long to spot the guards as well, 24 standing along the shore carrying a number of weapons. If not for the fact that the weapons were sheathed and stowed, the crew may well have jumped into a fight. It seems they be welcoming us with gifts. Amana laughed, which brought a smile to the crew. Praise the sister goddesses. All ships, take docking positions. At her words, the circular formation of the ships spread out, forming a two-layered line of 6 ships each. Just from looking at the port, it was clearly unable to hold all 12 ships, and could at most accommodate 4 of them, leaving the remaining 8 to anchor near the shore and swim. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. What are they? Many people asked themselves as they watched the ships closing in. Like the crew, there were many among the elves with keen eyes, able to make out the features of those aboard the ships. They have the ears and tails of beasts, yet walk as a man. The city lord nearby shook his head, though a small sigh escaped his lips. It seems their group was larger than we thought. When he had heard that there were 12 druids, he had expected either 12 small ships, or a lesser number of large ships. How could he have known that each druid was the strongest that they had to offer? One thing that was unmistakable was the expressions that could be seen on the faces of these strange-bodied travelers. Their mouths curved upwards, their faces filled with happiness. Not a single face seen showed hostility. Even when they were long since within range to attack, not a spell or arrow was fired. The first thing that arrived was the wind, which suddenly shifted to blow in from the sea, instead of out towards it. As the ships drew closer, the wind lessened, the sails falling limp until 4 ships glided seamlessly onto the docks. From there, they dropped large boulders tied to ropes off the sides of their ships, tying them down. As for the 8 that could not fit at the small fishing docks, they lined themselves a short distance from the shore before dropping similar loads. After which, the 8 ships seemed to spill forth their crew, all laughing as they either dove into the water, or leapt so high that they arrived at the shoreline in a single bound. Now that they were close, everyone could feel the subtle pressure that came when encountering the strong. Nearly all of the people coming from the ships were at the height of power, causing an invisible pressure to leak out towards the gathered elves. The largest ship, one which had taken the first position at the docks, pushed out a long and wide board, letting one end fall to the dock. The first person to walk off the ship was a woman in black clothes, with dazzling silver hair. As everyone else had followed behind her, it was clear to anyone that she was their leader, and she smiled warmly at the gathered party. However, When her mouth opened, both sides suddenly realized a critical issue. They couldn't understand a single word that she was saying. Chapter 150. A Gateway to a Brighter Future. Finally, I called out after I ascended back to the admin room, immediately falling on the bed and burying my face in the pillow. I hadn't hesitated for a single moment. As soon as the ship docked and I saw the achievements appear, I left the rest of the job to my host for now. If it couldn't handle even that much, then there would really be no saving it. Speaking of which, I took a brief moment to pull up the notification windows again to look at the achievements. I hadn't taken the chance to look at them closely before I logged out of the host. Congratulations. You have earned a personal achievement. For maintaining a single identity for an extended period, and faithfully playing the role assigned yourself, you have earned the Actor Achievement. Plus 20 points, Role Assimilation Trait unlocked. Congratulations. You have earned a personal achievement. For taking part in the first overseas voyage to a new continent. You have earned the World Explorer Achievement. Plus 20 points, Navigator Trait unlocked. Congratulations. You have earned a new achievement. For playing a crucial, active role in multiple civilizations meeting each other for the first time, you have earned the Ambassador Achievement. Plus 20 points. Noble Class unlocked. Okay. 3 new achievements weren't bad, and 2 of them even had new traits. Speaking of which, Terra. Navigator. Role Assimilation. Explain. I simply hugged the pillow as I sent the message out, enjoying the softness of it in my bed now that I was done with the hard wooden bench and thin blanket that I had been forced to grow used to over the last several months. Terra didn't seem annoyed by my short words, and instead laughed with her response. Role assimilation will be pretty useful for you. It's an achievement that was born to work in conjunction with the reputation system. From now on, as long as you actively play out a role that you assign yourself, you will adapt to the skills of that role more quickly. The months that you spent secretly training your druid control could be reduced to weeks, or even days. As for the navigator, think of it as an advanced version of the scout class. You'll have access to a simplified version of the world map whenever you are descended, and can plot a course to any destination you desire. Of course, it's still up to you to follow that course. I nodded my head lightly as I listened to her speak. So, it's a GPS. Role assimilation seems like it would be useful, though. I'm guessing that I can't just create a role of myself as a master swordsman, and quickly get good with sword skills, though. I could almost feel Terra nodding her head as she agreed with that thought. Right, you still have to put in the effort. The biggest thing that it changes is your aptitude, allowing you to more easily adjust. But, right now you have barely ever wielded a blade. If you were to create a role like that for yourself, you'd need to take quite a while to adjust. And this is only if you were able to properly act out the role without breaking character. I silently thanked her for the explanations, turning over in the bed and looking at the ceiling. You can go check on your mom, Leowin. I'll call you before we head back down. That won't be necessary. A familiar voice spoke up from the doorway, just as the gray mist was starting to spill out of my body to form Leowin. I rushed back here once I saw you returned. I wanted to give you an update myself. I let a groan slip out as I sat up, forfeiting the softness of the bed to properly look at Ryon. Something happened while I was gone. The goddess of magic nodded her head with a faint smile. You can say that. Tubrok and I got some prototype golems up and working. Right now, they can only take a list of preset commands, so I know that they aren't as good as what you can get from the market. That actually surprised me, as I hadn't expected them to be so successful this soon. But her next reveal was even better. Aside from that, I learned the next tier of the space magic, so I was able to double the radius for the storage bag. I'll just need more materials to make the enchantment invisible again. I gave that some thought, before I shook my head. Those materials are pretty hard to come by, so I don't want to just waste them every time the bag gets an upgrade. I'll just use my bag for now, and once they become more common I'll upgrade. Ryon nodded her head with a small smile, which turned into a much warmer one when she saw Leowin standing next to me. However, before the two of them could walk off, I called out to her. I've got another project for you and Tubrok to work on soon. This is going to be a really big one, I think. Her eyes practically lit up at that, and she nodded her head again before dragging Leowin off with a laugh. With the two of them gone, I began to search through the market. What I wanted this time was a method to travel between worlds. Although neither of mine are ready right now, I expect that it will not be easy to make what is needed for whatever I purchase. Fairy Gate. This gate is constructed filled with various forms of energy. Once built, It allows users to travel from one ferry gate to another by use of the gate keys. In the absence of a gate key, the user will automatically be sent to one random ferry gate. It is strongly suggested to purchase magic conductive materials to ease the construction requirements. 500 points. Requires mana, spiritual energy, ki, natural energy, divine energy to build. Reality virtual. This is a branch of technology which stems from the entertainment industry. As games develop, the ultimate goal will be the ability to assign one other world as the game world. Other games may be created autonomously, but to have them function as proper worlds under your control, you will be required to purchase them separately. Unable to connect to worlds within the same universe. 350 points. Information age required on Master World. Warp drive connection. This is a branch of technology focusing on instantaneous point-to-point transportation. At its peak, multiple worlds will be capable of constructing the warp connector, devices capable of linking together with any other of the same type for instant travel. 300 points. Stellar age required on all applicable worlds. World gates. This system causes small dimensional gateways to randomly appear among selected worlds. The gates will always appear in pairs, with both never appearing on the same world at a time. This system must be purchased once for each applicable world. Duration of gates can be set, or left random. 600 points. Rebirth. This system connects multiple universes. Whenever someone dies in one connected universe, they will be reborn in another connected universe as a random race under the Keeper's control. Must be purchased once for each applicable universe. 700 points. Interdimensional transportation service. This system creates a group of anonymous individuals, capable of ferrying people from one universe to another. They can only move between worlds under the Keeper's control. To summon them, one must learn their contact information, which can be determined upon purchase. 1000 points. Digital world. This is a branch of technology that allows the user to convert their body into a digital format to upload on a network. The appearance of the network will be set as a second world under the control of the Keeper. Additional network worlds must have this system purchased separately. 350 points. Information age required on Master World. World Shift Watch. This is a branch of technology which leads to instantaneous movement between universes. By projecting an energy field around the user, a small device attached to the wrist will allow them to safely travel from one universe under the Keeper's control to another, though the position they emerge from remains relative to their departure. 400 points. Information age required. Dive suit. This is a branch of technology which leads to instantaneous movement between universes. By containing the user within a special suit, they are able to safely generate and walk through dimensional portals. 400 points. Information age required. Aquatic world. This is a system which connects two worlds under the Keeper's control through water. Both worlds must have water for this system to function. When someone from one world fully submerges themselves in a body of water, they will be immediately taken to the connected world. For additional worlds to be connected, this system must be purchased multiple times. 800 points. When I narrowed down the search parameters, I saw that there were a total of 10 options available on the market. To be frank, I was really surprised that the selection was so small, but as I went over each item, I realized that it was because they already covered the majority of the possibilities. Some systems even seemed to be based on others, just to earn a few more royalty points. The first item on the list that really caught my eye was the warp drive connection system. I had noticed this system on the market right after I became a keeper, because it was one of the ones that had been listed by a previous generation of Earth Force 1. Though, I had yet to see any royalties from it, so it seemed as if nobody had bought it in the time I'd been keeper. My attention was quickly shifted elsewhere, though. Neither of the worlds that I owned had reached the stellar age, and they weren't going to any time soon. So, it would simply be a waste to invest in that one just because I could get it at a small discount. Instead, I looked through the items that I could reasonably get. Rebirth wasn't interesting to me, because I wanted active travel between worlds, rather than just moving the souls. And aquatic just seemed like a bad idea in the first place. My choices were quickly narrowed down to either the world gate or the ferry gate. One was an automated system, while the other was a crafted item. World gate would work in some situations, but also be a disaster if it went wrong. Furthermore, I'd have to buy it at least twice, in order to connect both Earth and Desbar. On the other hand, the ferry gate was something that I'd only have to purchase once to get the item blueprint, and then I could have the others make as many as they wanted. The only real issue was the need for extra ores, but I had an easy way to solve that. I closed my eyes and focused, sending a message out to all of the gods and goddesses, and even Leowin. Everyone, I'm going to be holding a Keeper's Cards tournament, starting tomorrow. It will be the first to 3 wins, so take the time to think it over. I'll be offering a grand prize to the final winner. They'll be allowed their own world to govern, similar to Ashley's Desbar. I could just imagine the expressions on the faces of the different deities, and the one demi-deity, as they heard the message. After all, if I don't have the ore that I need for the gate now, why don't I just make a world that does have it? And it will give the others something to look forward to later. Surprisingly, I received a message from Tara almost instantly after the announcement went out. You can count me out of the tournament. The system won't let me govern a world on my own. Rules are rules. Although her tone was casual, I could tell that she was a bit disappointed that she couldn't take part in the fun, or reap the potential rewards. Well then, I guess that you will just have to coach Orivy and the others, and work together with them if they win. I offered a suggestion, a small smile on my face. While Tara couldn't play as a keeper on her own, she could still act as the system companion to whoever did win the tournament. I guess I will. Her voice quickly became brighter as she sent that response back to me.